Chapter 1142. Don't worry. If you didn't do anything wrong, everything will be fine. Jiang Ning patted Jiang Xian's shoulder. Nowadays, the laws of Dao were becoming stricter and stricter, especially when there were conflicts between the Aboriginals and other races. It might even reach the prince. Now, everyone knew that the prince was most concerned about this matter. Thank you for your company, seventh young master. This matter has already been resolved. I don't know if there were any twists and turns, but I didn't do anything wrong. I was punished for a small mistake, Jiang Xian said with a smile. He knew that he had to make sure of this. With the Jiang family supporting him, especially with seventh young master accompanying him, as long as he didn't make any mistakes, the other party might not be able to do anything to him. Furthermore, there might not be a mistake. Perhaps the Security Bureau suddenly wanted to ask about this matter. At the thought of this, Jiang Xian felt a little more at ease. That's for the best. Jiang Ning chuckled. Jiang Ning's previous words seemed to be comforting, but in fact, had a different meaning. If there was nothing wrong, nothing would happen. If there was a mistake, then it would be hard to say. The people sent by the Jiang family to the capital naturally wouldn't be incompetent and wouldn't dare to be biased here. One had to know that this was the capital, where Qi Zixiao was in charge. Everyone knew about her fierce temperament. The Qin nation had sent several groups of envoys, killed them a few times, and had no choice but to send more. If she heard of any trouble, she might find an excuse to wipe out your entire family. If she said she would wipe out your entire family, she definitely wouldn't leave a single person alive. Not to mention the Empress, even the Aboriginal commoners had fierce temperaments. Even if you were a commoner, if you dared to use your power to bully him, he might just fight you to the death. Unfortunately, the Aboriginal commoners weren't weak. As long as they reached adulthood, they would have the strength of a man-will expert and an earth-will expert. They definitely had the strength to fight to the death. One had to know that it wasn't easy for these aristocratic families to recruit a few earth-will experts, let alone a spirit-will expert. Once they reached the spirit-will level, they would have to think of ways to curry favor with them. Therefore, in the territory of the imperial capital, no matter how arrogant and despotic you were in other places, no matter if you were from a major clan or a merchant association with great eyesight, you had to be well behaved in this place. When the group arrived at the Public Security Bureau, they saw 2 chairs in the courtyard. A burly man sat in the middle, and a little girl about 10 years old sat on the chair behind him. She had delicate features, and she was glaring at them with anger in her eyes. Honeysuckle sat at the back so that he wouldn't steal the spotlight. Jiang Ning greets Lord Mang. How have you been? Jiang Ning stepped forward and greeted. The Public Order Division of the Imperial Capital was divided into 4 divisions. Each division had a division chief, left division and right division respectively. Si Zhengzhu judged cases, Si Zhua Zhu arrested people, and Si Yu Zhu imprisoned people. If there was a major case, it would be sent to the Public Security Bureau of the Imperial Capital. The burly man's name was Meng Yu, and he was the head of the Public Security Bureau. When he saw Jiang Ning, his expression only softened slightly. The Jiang family had connections with Bai Shirin, the head of the Public Security Bureau, so they had naturally come to visit Meng Yu. You're not involved in the case, go to the side and wait, Meng Yu said in a low voice. Meng Yu said in a deep voice. He then turned his head to look at the slick-looking fatty in his 40s or 50s. Who are you? Are you the person involved in yesterday's theft? This lowly one is Jiang Xian, the steward of the Jiang Family Merchant Association. I was involved in yesterday's case. Jiang Xian felt a bit panicked when he stared at him. He felt like he was being stared at by some vicious beast, threatening and intimidating. Tell me the truth about what happened yesterday, Meng Yu said, staring at Jiang Xian. In reality, he was inclined to believe that the child called Fuji was telling the truth. After all, The princess had already wanted to take him away, and he'd said those tearful words before leaving. It seemed like he'd been wronged. If a 10-year-old child had really stolen something, he definitely wouldn't have behaved like that. Reporting to Lord, I was walking on the road yesterday when a little beggar suddenly bumped into me at a corner. That little beggar's hands and feet were fast, and he took a piece of gold from my waist. From his actions, it was obvious that he was a repeat offender. There are many thieves like him everywhere. Before Jiang Xian could finish speaking, Honeysuckle jumped up from her chair and scolded, "Nonsense, Fuji didn't steal anything from you. If you keep spouting nonsense, I'll beat you to death." Jiang Xian jumped in fright at Honeysuckle's fierce scolding. She was terrified, but she continued to quibble. "You know that thief. I experienced this personally, and there were other people who saw it. Otherwise, how could a little thief like that have gold?" He could tell that this young girl actually knew that little beggar. This made him feel that things were not going well. It was obvious that this young girl had a high status. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have been so greedy yesterday and caused so much trouble. He thought it was a small matter, but it had caused such a commotion and even provoked someone of status from the ancient clans to stand up for him. He was filled with regret, but now that things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet. Honeysuckle was infuriated when she saw that he was still quibbling. Her feet shook and she wanted to rush up and punch him. As for whether she could survive a punch, she didn't even consider it. "Your Highness, what did you say before? Before things are clear, does your Highness still want to silence me?" Mengyu turned around and punched Honeysuckle. He retreated more than 10 feet, a trace of anger on his face. Although he was angry, he was secretly delighted. Her Majesty's son was not even 5 years old, but he already had such strength. His talent was truly unparalleled. It was just that the princess was young and acted according to her likes and dislikes. Although his position was low, he couldn't let the princess act so wantonly. Honeysuckle pursed her lips and looked aggrieved. However, she felt that the other's words made sense. Aggrieved, she said, "You have to clear things up. You can't falsely accuse Fuji." Mengyu found it funny. The princess's strength was something that even he wasn't a match for. Her actions could be considered ostentatious, but she just had to put on an aggrieved expression at this time. It was hard to dislike her. After all, everyone knew that the princess was not even 5 years old. As the two of them spoke, Jiang Ning and Jiang Xian jumped in fright. Jiang Ning had thought of Honeysuckle's identity from the words, "Your Highness." As for Jiang Xian, she was frightened by Honeysuckle's furious appearance. Although the tiger cub was small, it was ferocious. Especially when their fists had collided. That ferocious-looking lord had been knocked back several meters. If no one had stopped her, that young girl would probably have beaten him to death. Mengyu saw Honeysuckle reluctantly return to his chair. He turned his head and said, "Are you speaking the truth? Every word this lowly one says is the truth. There is not a single lie. Where is the stolen goods?" Jiang Xian hurriedly took out the gold from the pouch. Mengyu smiled faintly. "Since you have a pouch, why did you put the gold at your waist yesterday?" Jiang Xian hurriedly said. "Let my lord know that this lowly one is here to deliver some goods. Before I set off, someone asked this lowly one to deliver something. Yesterday, I gave the item to that person, and this gold was my reward. This lowly one conveniently put it at my waist. Before coming here, he had already thought of an excuse. Although there were many flaws in his words, he couldn't care less. What kind of person asked you to deliver something? To where? Who?" Mengyu asked repeatedly. "This gold isn't gold ingots, but ore. Do you know how pure it is? How much gold can you offer? How much is your reward?" The person who asked me to deliver the goods covered his face and didn't say where to deliver it. He only said that someone would come to collect it after it was delivered. The person who came to collect the goods yesterday didn't show his face. This lowly one is in the wrong. I have betrayed the patriarch's trust and secretly smuggled goods. As for how much this gold can be offered, this lowly one really doesn't know. In any case, it will definitely be much higher than the normal shipping price. Jiang Xian admitted his guilt. He had wiped everything clean. In any case, the other party had no way of verifying it. In other words, he had classified himself as secretly smuggling goods. No one would pursue the matter of the goods being delivered. Although the identity of the other party was a problem, as long as he could avoid this disaster, nothing else mattered. Meng Yu's expression was non-committal. He looked to the side and asked, "Have you brought the others?" "They have. They are waiting outside the door." "Bring them in." "Take this Jiang Xian to the side," Meng Yu said. When Jiang Xian heard that there were others, he had a bad premonition. When he saw the two people he had brought in, his face was filled with fear. Cold sweat poured down his face. The two people were the two guards from yesterday. One of them had even been whipped 10 times. He didn't think much of it yesterday. He had only thought of the excuse when he arrived and didn't explain it to the two of them. Now, he only hoped that the two of them wouldn't say anything they shouldn't. Jiang Ning noticed Jiang Xian's expression and secretly shook his head. He knew that the problem had arisen from him. Furthermore, he had attracted the attention of the current princess. Unlike the other royal families, where princes and princesses were as numerous as the hairs on a cow, the Dayo Empress only had one son. It was difficult for the aboriginals to give birth. Even if this princess wasn't the next empress, her status was still extremely noble. Even if Jiang Xian didn't die this time, the Jiang family couldn't spare his life. Jiang Ning felt that Hua might not be the next empress because the empress was too strong and had a long life. She just had to give birth in her 20s. When the empress abdicated, she would probably choose a child in the prime of his life. However, that was a long time in the future. At this moment, Meng Yu asked the two guards about the situation. The two of them said the same thing that Jiang Xian had said at the beginning. This was what they had said when they arrived yesterday. "Were the two of you with Jiang Xian the entire time yesterday?" "Yes," the two of them replied in confusion. "Did anyone look for Jiang Xian?" The two of them subconsciously raised their heads to look at Jiang Xian. "Sir, when that person came to collect the goods yesterday, he was very secretive." The two of them didn't know. Jiang Xian was so frightened that he broke out in a cold sweat and interrupted. "I didn't ask you. What right do you have to speak here?" "Slap him." Meng Yu snorted. Immediately, someone slapped him twice. The sound was extremely loud. After the two slaps, Jiang Xian lost most of his teeth. His face was swollen like a pig's head, and he fainted. "The two of you better think carefully before you answer. If you lie again, I will definitely let you know the consequences of deceiving me," Meng Yu said irritably. He was already thinking about how to punish the three of them. Previously, he had only used words to ask questions in front of the princess. If it were any other time, he would have already given them a round of torture and then he would be able to get anything out of them. Even though his words to the princess just now were reasonable, he wasn't much better than the princess when it came to handling matters. It was just that his thoughts were usually more transparent than others. However, it was really difficult for him to solve the case by questioning. He had wanted to show his face, but now he was in a difficult position. Even now, the princess was restraining her temper and watching. Meng Yu began to feel resentment. That Jiang Xian had pushed all the blame away. Even though he had smuggled goods, and the movements of the person who had collected the goods were secretive, it was likely that he was up to no good. Meng Yu could make some trouble for him on this point, but that would be embarrassing. What happened yesterday? The two of you, speak truthfully. Do not lie, Jiang Ning said from the side. He was prepared to abandon Jiang Xian. If Jiang Xian was innocent, then it would be fine. But if he had stirred up trouble and broken the law, then he could not be left alive. If Jiang Xian escaped today, the princess would most likely hate the Jiang clan, and there would be a lot of trouble in the future. The two guards looked at Jiang Ning. They knew his identity and misunderstood. Gritting their teeth, they said, "What the two of us have said is not false. Everything we say is the truth." In their view, the young master of the Jiang clan would naturally stand on the side of the Jiang clan and protect Jiang Xian. Jiang Ning glanced at the two of them, then raised his hands to Meng Yu. "Sir, I won't disturb you any longer." After Meng Yu agreed, he swaggered out. It wasn't that he didn't pay attention to them, but that there was no benefit in staying here any longer. It was easy for people to think that he was supporting Jiang Xian and the other two. Now, he should remove himself from this matter as soon as possible. "Guards, take the three of them to prison first. Fuji will confront them tomorrow," Meng Yu immediately said. He turned to Hua and said, "Princess, these three people insist that Fuji is the thief. Let Fuji confront them tomorrow. I will definitely get to the bottom of this." Hua wasn't easy to fool. She seemed to see that he had no other way and curled her lips. Useless. This made Meng Yu's face turn black, but he couldn't refute her. After all, it had started strong but ended weak. After Hua left, Meng Yu thought about it. No matter what, he couldn't do this tomorrow. Those three people were stubborn, so he pried them open. Hua went to see Fuji, threw the few taels of silver he had to them, and then made an appointment before sneaking back to the palace. Early the next morning, the events of the night were laid out on Ren Baqian's desk. Ren Baqian smiled after flipping through it. He was a little gratified that Hua had managed to hold back her temper. It seemed like this child knew her limits. As for the truth of this matter, he didn't care at all. However, the people from the Jiang family were a little too bold. If these aristocratic families acted like this in the capital, they would be even more unscrupulous in other places. Were these aristocratic families from the Yun nation finally unable to restrain their old ways after climbing up to the important officials of the imperial court? Ren Baqian had to find an opportunity to teach them a lesson and kill a few chickens for them to see. Knowing that Hua would sneak out again today, he simply didn't care about her. In the afternoon, Hua slipped out of the kindergarten. She first went to find Fuji and the others, and then they went to the security bureau together. Unexpectedly, when Meng Yu saw her, he immediately said, "Your Highness, those three people were in the prison yesterday regretting their crimes and confessed." It was indeed that Jiang Xian who coveted Fuji's gold, that's why the subsequent events happened. Hua was overjoyed when she heard this. "I knew it. Fuji definitely didn't steal anything." After proving that she was right, Hua was quite excited. Fuji and the others were also excited when they heard this. It was just that they didn't know why they confessed after one night. After the excitement, Hua's expression changed. Her face was cold and stern, and she looked 80% like the Empress. Since they confessed, they broke Fuji's hands. I want to break their hands too. Also, you guys arrested Fuji and threw him in prison without asking the right and wrong. You guys are also guilty. Meng Yu had a headache when he heard this. Those three people were easy to deal with, but the others were going to be in trouble today. However, this was indeed the case. He had already gotten the truth from those three people last night, so the princess couldn't be blamed. 30 lashes for each person who broke their hands the day before yesterday. Meng Yu said directly. As for those three people, you don't have to do it yourself. No, I want to break their hands myself. Hua said loudly. Seeing that Meng Yu was in a dilemma, Hua asked suspiciously, don't tell me you let those 3 people go. If that's the case, I will definitely report this to my father. Meng Yu smiled bitterly and waved his hand. Bring those 3 people in. After a while, the 3 people were pushed in staggering. Fuji and the others were shocked when they saw them. They were covered in wounds and blood, and it was difficult for them to walk. When they were pushed in, they knelt on the ground with their arms hanging limply by their sides. They didn't know if they were broken, but their eyes were filled with fear and despair. They looked much worse than Fuji. Jiang Xian knocked his head on the ground and cried, "I deserve to die. I was blinded and actually framed you. I deserve to die 1,000 times." Hua was shocked at first, then he scolded the 3 people, "You deserve it." However, seeing their pitiful appearance, he didn't have the thought of breaking their hands. He glanced at Meng Yu and said, confessing under torture, "You are indeed useless." However, Meng Yu's face immediately darkened and he felt wronged. Yesterday, he must have been out of his mind to have interrogated the princess to solve the case. Nowadays, it was normal for him to solve cases like this. If word got out that he was judged as useless by the princess, he would be too ashamed to face anyone. Also, didn't you use the phrase, confessing under torture, incorrectly? Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1143. Jiang Ning managed to escape in time and handled the matter appropriately, blocking Ren Baqian's way of making an example out of the Jiang family. This made Ren Baqian take a second look at them. Among the many aristocratic families, the Jiang family was considered relatively stable. Although there were some domineering people, they were generally well-behaved and didn't reach the point of causing public indignation. However, there were a few aristocratic families who felt that they were relying on the important officials of the court and had a relapse, causing many complaints. Although they relied on their power to cover up, how could they escape the eyes of the rearguard commandery? Instead, he recorded all the crimes he had committed. 2 days later, Ren Baqian threw the crimes of these families in front of the court officials. Among them, 2 were clinging to Qin Chuan, while the other was clinging to Gu Yu, the imperial treasurer. It's just the people of the Yun nation bullying the people of the Yun nation. Qin Chuan understood the whole story and stroked his beard indifferently. The people of the Yun nation are also your majesty's subjects. They colluded with the prefectural army, acted unscrupulously, and disregarded the law. If we let them do this, how can we govern the country? Ren Baqian snorted. Qin Chuan didn't say much after hearing this. These people were only helping them earn some money, and many of the officials still didn't think much of them. The officials in the court hadn't been infected with extravagant habits. Although they liked money, they wouldn't go to war over it. It was just that Ren Baqian had targeted the 2 aristocratic families that were attached to Qin Chuan, which made him somewhat embarrassed. However, these aristocratic families were under Ren Baqian's instructions, so he couldn't speak out against it. He wondered if he should simply make a scene and mess up today's court meeting. In any case, he was also a troublemaker. This matter was done with ease, and no one could do anything to him. Ren Baqian knew what he was thinking and raised his voice. These aristocratic families use your reputation when they travel outside. If they commit crimes, you will be despised and hated by the people of the world. The gains don't make up for the losses, so you have to control them more in the future. Moreover, the law of the country is always like this. Otherwise, how can the people of the world be governed? The evidence of these 3 families is conclusive. Sir Baisher, you have to take action against the Public Order Bureau. Qin Chuan knew that it was useless to make a scene and felt somewhat depressed. Another 2 months passed, and the time limit of half a year set by the Empress was up. The Empress led everyone to choose Xiaoqing. A city built in the mountains would naturally not be very big. It would be difficult to provide for even tens of thousands of people. A mountain stronghold would at most have a few thousand people. 10,000 people would already be a famous stronghold within a radius of 100 miles. The 30,000 people in Tsushia city depended on the supplies sent by the surrounding villages every half a month to support these people. Among them, there were 5,000 soldiers and 25,000 mountain people. Every 6 months, there would be a caravan that traveled thousands of miles from the outside world. Most of them came to trade precious materials such as precious ores, herbs, young animals, sugar, salt, and other rare materials. Goods such as beast hides that could be sold for a high price in the outside world, unless they were extremely precious, were left to rot in the wilderness. Because it was difficult to transport goods in the mountains, it would take at least a year for a caravan to enter, and a round trip would take close to 2 years, so they could not carry much goods. When the Empress arrived, she saw that there were many aborigines from different villages and that the atmosphere in the city was lively. She felt rather gratified. There had never been such a scene in the 60,000 mountains. Although it couldn't be compared to the cities in the outside world, it was already rare in the mountains. As an important city of the Protectorate of the South, Tsushia City not only served as a supply point and an important mission to explore the surrounding areas, but it also brought great changes to the 60,000 mountains. When she arrived at the Protectorate of the South, the Empress first inquired about the current situation and then said, "The time limit is up." "How many Cardinal Heaven experts have arrived?" "There are 22 people who have come to the city to receive orders. Now that they know that your Majesty has arrived, they are waiting for you to summon them," Shiwani reported. The Empress sneered and said, "These people are really daring. Even though I am here personally, they still dare to be so disrespectful. Do they really think that I won't do anything to them?" Out of the 54 people, only 22 had arrived, which was less than half. This was even under the circumstances that the Empress had personally arrived. It could be seen that these people were vicious and arrogant by nature. They even dared to disregard her orders. Since that was the case, what was the use of keeping these people? The Empress sneered and asked, "Are Ma Hongyu and the others here?" The 19 of them can't stay in the city and are currently recuperating in the Tsushia Mountains, which are 15 kilometers away from the city. Should I summon them here? Hold a banquet in the city tonight and send someone to invite them over. First, give me the list of the Cardinal Heaven experts and their locations. Then, summon those 22 people here, the Empress said after pondering for a while. A moment later, 22 ferocious-looking men and women dressed in animal skins entered the residence. Each of them was unbearably rough, but their bodies were full of vigor and exuded a murderous aura. As they walked, they looked around without the slightest hint of respect. After all, Cardinal Heaven experts were powerful enough to occupy a piece of land even in the 60,000 mountains. They were revered by others and had extremely high aspirations. In addition, they had fought for their lives in the mountains since they were young and had experienced countless killings. They were fierce, aggressive, and bloodthirsty. Even though they were here on the orders of the Empress, they were only abiding by the agreement that they had signed decades ago. However, they didn't care much about it. It was absolutely impossible for them to obey a single holy scroll. Even though they were here, it wasn't easy for the Empress to mobilize them. However, when they saw the Empress in front of them, their carefree expressions immediately changed, and they stared at her with bewilderment. "Has no one taught you the etiquette you should have when you see me?" The Empress looked down and snorted. The Empress's vigor was surging like a furnace. Even those who were more than 30 meters away could feel the blood in their bodies churning and being triggered by the Empress's vigor. Like a tide, it surged endlessly. The aura around her was as deep as the sea, covering the sky and shrouding everyone. Everyone's expression immediately changed. That aura pressed down on them like the weight of a mountain and the moon, causing them to immediately lower their bodies. Shiwanya suppressed the surging vigor in his body and sighed in his heart. He had long heard that the Empress had broken through, but he didn't expect her strength to improve to such an extent. It was already difficult for him to keep up with her. Just by activating her vigor and using her aura to suppress others, she was able to subdue these unruly villains in one fell swoop. The Empress's aura was withdrawn upon contact, like a whale swallowing, and the surging vigor in her body also calmed down. However, the villains all tensed up. Although the Empress hadn't made a move, the strength she had displayed just now was far superior to everyone else's. The Aboriginals respected strength, and the strength displayed by the Empress was enough to make them not dare to act rashly. Which step did your Majesty break through and reach the level of the late Emperor? A villainous man with long, messy hair, a hideous tattoo on his chest, and a bone necklace hanging around his neck couldn't help but ask. Everyone's eyes flickered. Although they had guessed it, they still wanted to hear the Empress's confirmation. As for the late Emperor they were talking about, he was the first Emperor of Dayou. Back then, Yupeng had pulled out an army from a village in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. After establishing the country, he led the elite soldiers into the 60,000 mountains and disappeared without a trace. Cardinal Heaven experts had a lifespan of 200 years, and many of these people had seen Yupeng. At this moment, they realized that the feeling of oppression that the Empress gave them was no less than the feeling that Yupeng gave them when he came back. Although they had improved a lot over the years, the Empress had the strength of an intermediate longevity Heaven expert after breaking through. She was stronger than Yupeng when he brought his army here. The Empress snorted and said, "In the future, you will listen to my orders and must not disobey me. If you disobey me, I will not spare you. If you do well, I will not be stingy with rewards. As for my strength, you will naturally know in the future." Everyone's expression changed a few times. They looked at each other and bowed their heads in agreement. Since the girl in front of them was so powerful that it was enough to suppress everyone, and she was also the ruler of the Aboriginals, everyone naturally obeyed her orders. Seeing this, the Empress nodded and said, "You may leave first. There will be a banquet in the residence to entertain everyone. Tomorrow, you will have to go and do some things." That night, many Aboriginal villains, Mahongyu, and other experts attended the banquet. Together with the people from the Temple of Heaven, the three parties almost had another conflict. However, under the suppression of the Empress, nothing happened in the end. The next day, the Empress called for 22 villains and divided them into teams of 2. They were divided into 11 teams and went to the 11 positions that the Empress had selected. They were going to directly attack those future villains. If they bend their heads and surrender, I can spare their lives. If they resist, kill them on the spot. Shiwanya, mobilize 11 teams of 100 people to follow them and lead the way, the Empress said in a deep voice. These experts and villains were even more familiar with the surroundings than Shiwanya's soldiers. However, the Empress clearly made it clear that these soldiers were going to monitor them, lest someone slack off and let those people escape. Chapter 1144. 7 or 8 days later, at a place called Heading Cliff in the 60,000 mountains, there was a village at the foot of the mountain with about 7 to 8,000 people. It could be considered a large village with a radius of hundreds of kilometers. The village was called Bird Bone Village. Outside the village walls were the bones of ferocious beasts that were as white as jade. Even though they had been dead for many years, they still exuded a fierce aura that deterred ordinary beasts from approaching. A huge bird head hung above the village gate. Just the head alone was the size of 2 houses. It was incomparably huge and had countless sharp teeth in its mouth. It looked extremely ferocious. At this moment, a man and a woman came to the village. The man had a fierce face and messy hair. He was tall and strong with a 3-tailed poisonous scorpion tattooed on his body. The woman's face was beautiful, her figure was graceful, and her skin was bronze. However, her entire body exuded a bloody and vicious aura. From her neck to her chest, there was a flower embroidered on her animal skin. However, the flower was also full of sharp teeth, like a sunflower, layer upon layer. When they arrived, they did not enter the village. Instead, they stimulated their chi and blood, and their auras shot up into the sky like two pillars of smoke. Behind them, there was a group of 100 soldiers following them from a distance. As they released their auras, countless people were alarmed and jumped onto the village walls that were more than 3 meters high. At the same time, a fierce aura shot up into the sky from within the village. A figure first leaped tens of meters high before crashing to the ground and appearing in front of them. Xian Cho, Zhu Puhua, you two went to see the young emperor. What are you doing here? The burly man shouted after identifying the two. We came here because we saw the young emperor. The young emperor has ordered us to bring you to see her. You should come with us. The young emperor has already passed that level and is now at the same level as the late emperor. It will be easy for him to kill us, Zhu Puhua said. Bah, I'm comfortable here. Why would I go to see her? It's your business if you want to listen to her, but if you want to bring me there, then we'll have to fight. It just so happens that I've wanted to test your skills for a long time. It's just that I was too far away in the past. I've only heard of your reputation and haven't had the chance to fight. When the burly man heard that the Empress had reached the longevity heaven realm, his expression changed, and then he became somewhat disapproving. So what if she has reached the longevity heaven realm? You want me to listen to your orders just by sending a random person? The little emperor said that if there is any resistance, kill without mercy. Bo Bai, if you want to make a move, you better think about the consequences. The man called Xian Cho said with an unfriendly expression. These aboriginals living in the depths of the 60,000 mountains had fought for many years. Not only were they not afraid of fighting, but they also liked to fight. If they didn't know each other, they would usually fight first. Bo Bai's expression changed as a vicious aura surged from his body. Then let's see if you can take my life. It just so happens that I've also heard of Bo Bai's fierce reputation. I've long wanted to see if it's really as the rumors say. Xian Cho twisted his neck and raised the irregular metal rod in his hand with a sinister expression. The reason why it was said to be irregular was because the rod was made from a bunch of metals that had been forcefully melted together, but it had not completely melted into a ball. Thus, the surface of the rod was covered in ridges. If it could withstand a strike, it would increase its lethality by quite a bit. In Bo Bai's hand was a huge leg bone. It was about 2 meters long, about the same length as a metal rod, and as white as jade. Both sides had ferocious expressions on their faces, and without saying a word, they crashed into each other. There was a loud bang in the air, and the soil on the ground flew everywhere. Everyone could barely see two figures fighting as they chased each other toward the nearby Hidingya. Zhu Puhua pondered for a moment, then followed the two of them. The two of them fought for a long time. In the end, Xian Cho was not as strong as Bo Bai. He was struck by the rod, and half of his body was deformed. Bo Bai had also expended most of his energy. His internal organs had long been injured, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he still had the ability to fight. Just as he was about to give chase, his expression suddenly changed, and he leaned back. A cold light streaked across his chest, almost cutting his abdomen open. Zhu Puhua was holding a strange weapon in her hand. It was actually the toe of a bird's claw. After being processed, it was extremely sharp, and she used it as a short knife. Bo Bai's expression changed drastically. He only felt that his wound was numb, but he didn't feel any pain at all. The blood on his wound had turned dark green, and there was a rancid smell to it. Zhu Puhua didn't approach Bo Bai any more after hitting him with one strike. She just stared coldly at him. Bo Bai was indeed powerful. He had also entered the advanced stage of the Cardinal Heaven realm. It was no wonder that he was so brave and didn't listen to the little emperor's orders. If he hadn't fought with Xian Cho just now and wanted to kill Xian Cho wholeheartedly, he wouldn't have been able to sneak up on him and succeed in his sneak attack. Bo-Bai's body shook, and he gave Ju Puwa a sinister smile. He reached for his chest and dug out all the flesh that had been cut open. Originally, his abdomen had almost been cut open. Now that he had pulled, even his internal organs were exposed. However, he did not care at all. However, that was all he could do. Ju Puwa moved like lightning and circled around Bo-Bai. Bo-Bai, who was seriously injured, didn't have the strength to resist, and his head fell directly. She hung Bo-Bai's head on her waist and turned to look at Axian Cho. Her eyes flickered. Both of them had a grudge against each other. If she hadn't obeyed the little emperor's orders, she would have taken advantage of his illness and taken his head. However, she gave up on this idea in the end. She carried Axian Cho's body back and threw it to the 100 elite soldiers. As for Niaogu village, they were in an uproar when they found out that Bo-Bai had died. Hundreds of people rushed out to avenge him, but Ju Puwa circled them twice before they fell to the ground and died. These 22 people were divided into 11 teams. The distance they traveled varied, and the Empress only received a full report a month later. This time, she killed a total of 8 people and only captured 3. 2 of the people she sent died as well. After learning about what happened to these 11 villages, the rest of the villains rushed to Chuxia City. In addition to the 3 people who were captured, the Empress punished them and assigned them to the criminal camp. In the future, when they fought against the foreign races, these 19 people would be the vanguard. They would fight to the death and would only return to their original identities if they didn't die in 3 battles. Under the pressure of the Empress's powerful strength, no matter how arrogant they had no choice but to obey. Moreover, they weren't afraid of fighting. In addition, there were 6 people gathered together. The Empress personally went to them and killed them with a flip of her palm, shocking everyone who saw the Empress's power. From then on, no one dared to shirk the Empress's orders. As a result, the discovered Aboriginal tribes were brought under the jurisdiction of the Protectorate of the South, and no one dared to disobey. If it weren't for the fact that it was difficult for the tribes to support too many soldiers, the Protectorate of the South would have more than doubled in size. The Protectorate of the South also took advantage of this to recruit hundreds of Kismet Heaven experts. Like the winged cavalry, they were considered the elites of the elites. In addition, the Empress also consulted Renbachian about how to settle these Cardinal Heaven experts who were under her control. She would set up a martial arts hall and place these villains into it. They would be promoted based on their military exploits and wouldn't be able to command troops. However, they could use their military exploits to receive salaries and exchange for resources. After reorganizing the rear, the Empress set off with her people. Among them were more than 40 Aboriginal Cardinal Heaven experts, 20 from the Temple of Heaven, and 19 experts from Great Xia. There were a total of more than 80 people. In addition, there were 500 winged cavalry warriors, some people from the medical bureau, some people from the imperial kitchen, and some other odd job workers. A total of more than 600 people were heading to the depths of the 60,000 mountains to exterminate the foreign races. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1145. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. There were countless strange trees by a lake in the 60,000 mountains. They were ferocious and looked like monsters. Every night, countless fluorescent lights would dance in the strange forest, painting the forest with a layer of color. It was as beautiful as the Milky Way. However, the craggy shadows cast in the forest were even more sinister and strange. 7 or 8 humanoid toddlers of different ages were running. Their skin was green, and their ears were long and slanted. Their eyes were black crystals, and their fangs popped out of their mouths. From time to time, they would grab a jade-waisted slave with a beast's face and a butterfly's body and stuff it into their mouths. Before the jade-waisted slave became an insect, its host was a human. After breaking out of its body, it had a human face. If the host was a beast, it had a beast face. Its wings were as hard as steel, but they could not resist the toddlers. They did not seem to have the desire of ordinary life forms to survive. A few adult herdsmen were not far away. Their skin was wrinkled, and they were nearing the end of their lifespans. The herdsmen would grow up here when they were young. When they became adults, they would erase all emotions and live in different places. When their lifespans were nearing the end, they would return to a burial ground and bury themselves. Only a few elders would stay here to take care of the toddlers. At this moment, a herdsman was looking at the toddlers with a cold gaze. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he appeared in the distance. At the same time, a huge rock broke through the air and smashed into the ground where he had been standing. Most of it had sunk into the soil. A few herdsmen elders looked up expressionlessly. They saw more than 10 burly men leaping from afar and landing in front of them. "You bugs are really hard to find." One of the burly men laughed sinisterly and waved the mace in his hand. "Kill them." Another burly man roared. He tapped his foot and charged toward a herdsman elder. However, a person with a human body and legs that looked like entangled vines came out of the darkness and collided with the burly man. A few herdsman elders stretched out their arms, and countless jade-waisted slaves formed a river of light and surged toward the burly man. Just as the river of light was about to drown everyone, a flame ignited in the air. It covered a radius of nearly 300 meters and covered a large number of jade-waisted slaves. Chains appeared in the air and formed a large net, binding the herdsman elders. A few herdsmen twisted their bodies into extremely strange shapes and broke free from the layers of chains in the blink of an eye. However, at this moment, a mirror appeared behind one of the herders, and an arm stretched out from it. The herdsman was already retreating, but he didn't expect something like this to happen behind him. The arm instantly pierced through his chest. The men didn't care about the jade-waisted slaves that filled the sky. They jumped high into the air and pounced toward the remaining herdsmen. The chains enveloped the surroundings as if they were trapping the herdsmen and the men in an iron cage. In less than a dozen breaths, the 4 herder elders died one after another, leaving behind only the startled herder child. "Bring these little things back to Emperor Qi." Ma Hongyu walked out of the darkness step by step. Following the death of a few herdsmen elders, the jade-waisted slaves fell into chaos. Apart from a few who continued to attack, most of them started killing and devouring each other. A green-clothed, white-bearded old man stretched out his hand and pointed. Chains appeared out of thin air and tied up a few herder children. Tang Gu, search the surroundings with Donghua Sun. The rest of you, go to the place where they live and investigate, Ma Hongyu continued. In the darkness, many people followed her orders and headed in a certain direction. A beautiful lady in a blue dress walked out of the mirror in the air and cupped her fists at Ma Hongyu. In the shadow formed by the jade-waisted slaves and the strange wood, a figure crawled out. His entire body was as black as ink. Soon after, the ink faded, revealing a handsome young man with a frivolous expression. These 2 people looked young, but they were actually spirit will experts with long lifespans. Their real age was more than 50 or 60 years old. The earlier they attained the spirit will level, the younger they looked. After making arrangements for everyone, Ma Hongyu ignored the ferocious people in Dayo's martial arts hall. She walked to the mangled corpses of the herdsmen and remained silent for a moment. That day, they were ambushed by these herdsmen. Nearly half of the 30 experts were killed, and many of them were buried here. Now, it took them some time to find their lair and exterminate them. First, they could stabilize the rear and finally head to the boundary between the 2 realms. Secondly, he could also comfort those experts who had perished at the hands of the enemy. Although their friendship wasn't deep, they were all human experts and most of them came from Great Xia. Compared to the aboriginals, they were naturally closer. 4 hours later, everyone returned to the top of a mountain where the Empress, more than 10 experts from the martial arts hall, and the people from the Temple of Heaven were waiting. Two experts who were good at concealment and investigation had previously investigated the herdsman's hiding place. This elder was only here to raise children and wasn't dangerous. Therefore, he didn't have much protection. In fact, there were only two outsiders that were being controlled. One was the ginseng race, whose legs were like entangled vines, and the other was the giant arms race, whose arms were like pillars and whose hind limbs were relatively short. They ran on all fours and moved very quickly. This time, they dispatched nearly half of their manpower and took them down without any trouble. The gathering place of these two races had already been destroyed a year ago, and this time, they were also killed. In addition to the 5 herdsmen's children, there were many other discoveries, including the eggs of the jade-waisted slaves. They were crystal white and fish-sized. Every day, countless small, fish-like eggs would fall from them. After peeling off the outer layers of eggs, they discovered that there was a pink and tender piece of meat inside, which was amazing. As for this pink and tender piece of meat, everyone studied it for a few days and discovered that if it was placed near the jade-waisted slaves, a jade-waisted slave would attach itself to it every day. In just a moment, that jade-waisted slave would turn into ashes. Presumably, the jade-waisted slaves were also food for this piece of meat. Upon seeing this, the Empress asked someone to capture some live jade-waisted slaves, that strange wood, and this piece of meat back to the capital. Now that most of the gathering places of the foreign races have been exterminated, the matter here is considered over. Next, we will head to the boundary between the two realms, the Empress instructed everyone. Everyone was excited when they heard this. The boundary between the two realms was extremely suitable for breakthroughs, and it was 100 times better than here. Li Fu and the others used the wall of the two realms to cultivate. In just 3 years, 2 of them had broken through to the realm of opening heaven and earth, and the rest had also made great progress. Everyone had been fascinated by this for a long time. A few hundred kilometers away from Chu Xia City, a group of Kismet Heaven elites were lying in ambush on a cliff, draped in a net made of grass and leaves. Half of them were armed with longbows. After waiting for a full 2 hours, 2 soldiers each carried a giant egg that was half the size of a human and climbed up from the cliff. They threw the giant egg to the ground, and a fishy smell spread out. In less than an hour, 2 giant birds with a wingspan of more than 30 meters flew over from the distant sky. They seemed to have discovered that there was a change in their nest. Immediately, they let out a mournful cry and pounced toward the place where the giant egg had been smashed. When they got close to a certain distance, the net was suddenly lifted. Hundreds of soldiers raised their longbows and shot a rain of arrows. The 2 giant birds couldn't dodge in time and were immediately pierced by countless arrows. Not only did the 2 giant birds not die, but they also didn't slow down in the slightest. Instead, they became even more ferocious, and their speed increased. A pair of giant claws swooped down on top of everyone's heads. However, at this moment, dozens of sword gleams leaped into the air. Blood and internal organs poured down. A burly man who looked like a captain laughed and said, "This time, it went smoothly. We didn't let these 2 leopards escape. I don't know what route they're going to clear. These birds and beasts can't be stopped," and not long after they cleared the route, more came from elsewhere, a soldier asked curiously. I only heard about this 2 days ago. It said that as long as they clear a route, the Chamber of Commerce won't have to rely on walking to enter the mountain. The captain revealed a mysterious smile. Everyone immediately became alert and looked over. If they don't walk, are they going to fly over? Someone laughed. They really flew over. The captain's words were met with disbelief. You'll know when the time comes. In fact, he didn't know much and had only heard a few words. However, as he said this, everyone became even more curious. Chapter 1146. Father, I've shrunk again. A girl who looked 13 or 14 years old, wearing a dark blue coat and a red checkered school uniform, yelled as soon as she got out of the elevator. Her voice was full of sadness and despair. Oh! A fierce-looking bald man looked up and glanced at her before looking down at the documents in his hand. I've shrunk again. The girl shook the man's shoulders frantically, and his upper body shook so much that only a shadow could be seen. Let go, I'm dizzy. The man was naturally Renbochin, and the girl was Honeysuckle. Look, I don't have any muscles. I've been training for so long, but they're all gone. I'm so ugly now. Honeysuckle pointed at her long legs under the red checkered skirt, threw off her coat, and revealed her arms. She then twisted her body like bodybuilders did and looked aggrieved. Ah! Renbochin smirked and glanced at her. Indeed, he couldn't see her muscles anymore and looked like an ordinary girl. Her skin was fair, and her wool was as delicate as porcelain. She was becoming more and more like the Empress, just a little softer. One could tell that she was very intelligent from the movement of her eyebrows, and people would like her at first glance. She was in high spirits when she spoke. This was how a daughter should be. What was so good about her original muscular appearance? However, Honeysuckle had a special fondness for muscles after seeing and hearing about them since she was young. Her sense of beauty was abnormally distorted. Over the past few years, her muscles had gradually shrunk as she absorbed and transformed the blood in her womb, which terrified her. Last time, Honeysuckle said that she was leaking air. However, Renbochin felt that it was pretty good. It's pretty good now. Renbochin laughed. It's not good at all. It's not threatening at all. Honeysuckle grumbled. The weight of the fitness equipment here isn't enough to build muscles. The fitness equipment is for you to use, not to lift weights. You've already broken 2 treadmills, Renbochin said expressionlessly. Humph. Honeysuckle sat cross-legged on the sofa. Father, can I ask you something? Honeysuckle rolled her eyes. Speak. Renbochin put down the documents in his hands. If he didn't settle this issue, he wouldn't be able to settle his affairs. What does it feel like to like someone? Honeysuckle blushed and asked shyly. Hua, this child, had always been lively and energetic, jumping up and down the roof. It was rare for him to be so bashful. However, her question caused Renbochin to become absent-minded and silent. Father? Honeysuckle looked up. It's probably because you want to bury him under your palace, Renbochin replied without changing his expression. Honeysuckle was terrified. What about love? Chop him up and bury him under your palace. Renbochin said without hesitation. He looked straight at Hua and asked, do you have someone you like? I can help you bury him. No, of course not. I don't even like my father. I don't want him to be buried under the palace at all. Honeysuckle shook his head, his eyes rolling. Hee hee. Renbochin let out a meaningful laugh. He was wondering if he should pay more attention to the kind of people that Hua came into contact with at school. What a horrible laugh, Honeysuckle mumbled. Have you done your homework? Honeysuckle's face turned sorrowful again. Are you my father? I just came back. It's a gift from playing games. Renbochin looked calm. Honeysuckle's expression suddenly changed, and she looked like she was making threatening gestures. There's one more thing. Next weekend is New Year's Day, and there's a party. Honeysuckle said. We should go back next week. Renbochin did some calculations. But I really want to participate. I've never participated before. Honeysuckle jumped over, hugged Renbochin's head, and shook it. It was another series of afterimages. Don't shake, I'm dizzy, Renbochin said. Honeysuckle was getting stronger and stronger. Okay, I promise you. In that case, we have to go back today. Renbochin was dizzy from her shaking. Thank you, father. Honeysuckle was overjoyed. She exerted force with her legs, and half of the sofa disappeared. There's one more thing. Honeysuckle realized that she was in trouble again and quickly changed the topic. Parents and children are going to perform together at the New Year's Day party. Renbochin's attention was indeed diverted, and he resolutely said, I'm not going. Honeysuckle suddenly burst into tears. She looked at Renbochin bitterly and said, other parents can take their children to the amusement park, play with them, and eat with them. Mother is now in a faraway place, and father is addicted to the brothel. I'll go. I promise you. Renbochin shuddered after hearing what she said. After secretly interacting with Lolita, Honeysuckle became even more mischievous. Compared to the straightforward, stubborn, and tough Honeysuckle, Renbochin preferred to see her mischievous side. However, most of the time, it was a headache. Seeing that Renbochin had agreed, Honeysuckle hummed a song and skipped back to her room. Renbochin shook his head slightly and continued to look at the information in his hand. 9 years ago, the first exploration spacecraft entered the node and jumped along a curve. 3 years later, a second batch of 3 exploration spacecraft, which were equipped with the best technology from various countries, was sent into the node. Until now, there had been no response. In the past 9 years, Earth had made new breakthroughs in materials and energy technology. China was already preparing to produce the third batch of exploration spacecraft, but the attitude of some Western countries was somewhat uncertain. After all, each exploration spacecraft not only required the latest technology from various countries, but it also consumed a lot of resources. Many people thought that no one knew what was at the other end of the node, how long it would take to reach the other end, and whether there would be any gains. All of this was unknown. It would be fine if the probes could return, but if the probes couldn't return in a short period of time, the countries would only be paying and not reaping any benefits, and many people would have objections. Of course, in the long run, this was a must. However, the economic situation of many Western countries wasn't very good, especially some of the older countries. The high welfare of the people caused the country to be in the red all the time. Coupled with the elections and the solidification of the social classes, these countries weren't very stable. For them, what was more important was the immediate situation. Unless the exploration spacecraft sent back some information, they wouldn't be able to divert the attention of the people and internal conflicts. Otherwise, if the current situation continued to develop, there would inevitably be a war in the future. However, with him and the Empress around, this fire might not burn China in the early stages. However, no one could say for sure in the later stages. After thinking for a moment, Renbochin made some comments on the document and put it aside. He didn't need to spend too much effort on Earth. That night, Renbochin brought 2 flowers back to Deo. Renbochin's initial small goal had been achieved. 2 flowers had to attend school in Deo and on Earth every week. However, she only returned to Earth once every half a month or even 20 days. As a result, she missed most of her classes on Earth. She had already been held back for many years. After all, 1 year in Deo was equivalent to 3 years on Earth. Although 2 Flower was intelligent, she didn't really like to study. She was still in the 3rd grade of primary school, but her classmates in the 1st grade were already in the 4th grade of middle school. As a result, she had to transfer schools every few months. Coupled with her special identity, she almost didn't make any friends. Only the principals and teachers of many schools in Wuji City knew a little about the situation, but they didn't know the inside story. On the contrary, this allowed the Messier 87 department to prove a previous conjecture that time on Earth and Renbochin's region weren't the same. It felt like 1 day in the sky was equivalent to 1 year on Earth. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1147. Father, don't forget what you promised me. You have to practice with me. Back in the palace, Hua didn't forget to remind him, afraid that he would disappear the moment she turned around. Got it. Renbaqian wanted to rest, so he agreed. With Lolita's help, the documents could be sent to Lolita first before being sent to him. With the help of artificial intelligence, it could save a lot of time. If there were no major issues, 2 days wouldn't delay anything. Since he had promised her, he would practice with her. In recent years, Hua had learned a musical instrument with great interest. It was the drum set. Renbaqian felt that the piano, zither, and violin were better, but Hua liked percussion music. Thinking about it, this suited her character. The drums were all custom-made with special metals and animal hides. Otherwise, a single hit from the drumstick would destroy the drum set. In a large hall, Hua was wearing short sleeves and hot pants while Renbaqian was playing the arrow. The drum and the melodious sound of the arrow extended from the hall to the outside. The guards outside the hall were all preoccupied with their thoughts. The drum and arrow sounds weren't bad. Although they were a little rough, they weren't unpleasant. However, when Hua opened her mouth, it was a little sensational. I have seen a dream that can move mountains. I hope it never ends, even if the sky falls and the earth shatters. Renbaqian looked depressed. Hua's voice was pretty good. Although she was always lively and energetic, her voice was like a silver bell. Her singing wasn't as good as Hua's, this was probably because he had grown up. No one was perfect. December 31st, Jianan Primary School. At 1:30 p.m., all kinds of cars were parked at the school gate. Nowadays, there were very few ordinary people in Wuji City. Most of the people in the city were martial artists, so the economic conditions weren't bad. The ordinary primary schools here were equivalent to some expensive private colleges. The parents of the students were mostly officials, rich people, disciples of martial arts centers, and some other talented students. A black limousine slowly stopped in front of the school gate. As the door opened, a girl wearing a dark blue open-collar jacket, a white shirt, and a red and black checkered skirt alighted. Most of the students in the school wore this kind of attire. This was the current school uniform. However, this girl was still quite eye-catching. She had excellent looks, bright eyes, and a simple ponytail hanging behind her head. She looked very refreshing. What was even more noteworthy was that the temperature was close to 0 degrees Celsius, yet his legs were exposed. Even if children nowadays started to practice life force qigong or other cultivation techniques from elementary school, they were still too young and their strength was too low, so they couldn't reach the point where they were immune to cold and warmth. The other person who got out of the car looked to be in his 30s. He was bald and had a bear-like body. He had a fierce face and wore a light gray suit. He looked fierce and intimidating. Daddy. Hua hugged Renbaqian's arm excitedly. It could be seen that she was indeed very happy. It was rare for her to act like a spoiled child. When he saw her expression, he smiled and said, "Let's go." When they saw Honeysuckle, many of the children looked fearful. They slowed down or made way for her. What's wrong? Who is she? A parent noticed that his child seemed to be afraid and asked in a deep voice. One had to know that most of these children would walk the path of a martial artist in the future. If they had fear at such a young age, it would be detrimental to their future cultivation. It's Ren Yuqing, Year 3 Class 1. She transferred here and beat up everyone in the school in just 3 days. A little fatty said with a look of fear on his face. He even stopped in his tracks. Year 3. All the students in the school can't beat her. Beside the little fatty was a dignified middle-aged man. He was dissatisfied when he saw his son being so timid. We can't beat her. She's too savage. All the Year 5 students together can't beat her. The little fatty seemed to have imagined a scene, and his eyes were filled with fear. The middle-aged man's face darkened. He glanced at Rinpoche and could feel that he was an expert who seemed to be stronger than him. When he took a closer look at the girl, he was immediately shocked. This girl gave him the feeling that she was very dangerous. He was a dignified Earth-level expert, but a Year 3 girl actually made him feel dangerous. Furthermore, she gave off an even more dangerous vibe than that majestic man. The middle-aged man calculated in his heart. He didn't know Ren Yuqing's identity and had to get someone to investigate. Her surname was Ren. When Hua was on Earth, she was called Ren Yuqing. After returning to Dao, she was called Qi Yuqing. After a few years, she had gotten used to it. Rinpoche naturally noticed the abnormalities of the other children. He was at ease. He knew what Hua did in school. No matter where she transferred to, the first thing she did was to beat up the school from top to bottom. She had been like this since kindergarten, and it was still the same now. It could be said that all the primary school students in Wuji City had been beaten up by her. Then, she forced others to call her father. This problem gave him a headache. He didn't know how many descendants the royal family had. Fortunately, he wasn't afraid of others finding trouble with him. If it were other children, they would have been beaten to death. Master. A burly man cupped his fists and greeted him. Beside the burly man was a child who looked to be about the same age as Hua. He was well-built and had sharp eyes. However, his eyes shrank when he saw Hua. Rinpoche nodded slightly. He recalled that this burly man was a third-generation inner disciple of the martial arts center and had some impression of him. The middle-aged man's pupils shrank when he saw this scene. Although he didn't know Rinpoche, he knew this burly man. He was an expert from Dao Martial Arts Center and was extremely ferocious. Although their strengths were similar, Hua's combat strength was far superior to his. He was actually so respectful to that person, and that person's surname was Ren. The middle-aged man's heart skipped a beat. He immediately guessed Rinpoche's identity. However, that person should be 60 years old now, right? Or someone else. Naturally, there were many people who had the same idea as him. There were a few forces in Wuji City that couldn't be provoked, and Dao Martial Arts Center was one of them. Those who were well-informed knew what kind of great things the master of Dao Martial Arts Center had done in the past. Rinpoche didn't care about what other people thought. Instead, he was enjoying the feeling of accompanying Hua on campus like an ordinary father. Of course, it was just a momentary feeling. Along the way, he was somewhat concerned about Hua's expression. He wanted to see if he could find out if Hua had someone she liked and then bury him under the main hole. According to Dao's time, Hua was 8 years old. Including the time on Earth, she was about 10 years old. She definitely didn't like anyone. At most, it could be considered as having a good impression of someone her age. However, she grew up faster than other children, so some things were hard to predict. Unfortunately, Rinpoche didn't find anyone that Hua cared about. Even though there weren't many girls who greeted her, most of them were afraid of her. The whole afternoon was the New Year's Eve party. Every child and their parents would perform. In the middle was Hua. Her drum set and arrow had already been sent in advance and placed aside. When Hua's drumsticks fell, everyone's expression changed. The sound of the drum seemed to be pounding on everyone's heart, making their blood surge. It was as if they heard the roar of a wild beast. Following that, the sound of the arrow in Rinpoche's hand could be heard. A bear-like man sitting there holding a small arrow looked somewhat comical, but the other parents didn't dare to have such thoughts. I've seen the dream that can move mountains, I hope it never ends, even if the sky falls and the earth cracks. I've seen the miracle that just happened, my silent prayers have been answered, my broken heart has been strengthened again. The song was sung by Rinpoche. His voice was deep but full of power. After the song ended, Hua looked delighted and forcefully brought the drumsticks down. Dong! Boom! The ground, the drum set, Hua, and Renbachien were all gone. There was only a big hole in front of the classroom, and the classroom was covered in dust. Chapter 1148. Renbachien and Hua returned to their residence dejectedly. Both of them were fine, but a few second-year students were injured downstairs. The most unlucky one was their head teacher, who was directly hit. This caused a small disturbance. However, Honeysuckle's expression showed that he was quite happy. Although the ending wasn't perfect, attending the New Year's Eve party with her father was enough to make her happy. "Brother, are you in Wuji City?" Ren Wanyan asked directly after picking up the call. Renbachien saw a trace of excitement in his serious face. With his current status, it seemed that something big had happened and that there were great benefits. "What happened?" "I'll be there soon. I'll tell you when I arrive," Ren Wanyan said. A moment later, the flying car landed on top of the building. The domestic air traffic control had never been relaxed. Except for a few departments, it was difficult to apply for air routes even if one had the money. More importantly, the procedures were troublesome. This was especially true for an important place like Wuji City. Ren Wanyan actually came by flying car, which showed that there was indeed something important. "Yu Qing has become prettier." Ren Wanyan laughed as soon as he entered the house. "Let me hug you. Men and women shouldn't touch." Hua smiled faintly. "Are you trying to take advantage of me, second uncle?" Ren Wanyan's expression suddenly froze. Ren Xia snickered behind him. "But if there is a gift..." Hua dragged her words. "Have you finished your homework?" Renbachien glanced at her. "I'm done." Honeysuckle smiled. As for whether she had finished her homework, only she knew. "Then write it again." Hua stared at Renbachien in disbelief and asked, "Are you my biological father?" "Yu Qing, this is for you. It's the latest red badge." Ren Xia took out a box. This was the latest communication device. It was red like a flame and looked like a badge. It was quite exquisite. Most importantly, this red badge was a limited edition, and there were only 999 of them in the world. The general edition was an azure badge. In addition to the color, there was also a generation difference in performance. "Thank you, Brother Ren Xia." Hua smiled. "In a few years, you will look younger than Ren Xia." Ren Wanyan sat down and laughed. Renbachien laughed. It wasn't that he looked younger than Ren Xia, but that time was different. In a few more years, Ren Xia would even be older than him. This was something that could not be helped. "How far has your research progressed?" Renbachien asked casually. He had heard a little about the pharmaceutical laboratories that Ren Wanyan had invested in. Renbachien's parents were in their 90s, but they were still quite healthy. Most of this was due to the medicine that Renbachien brought back from Dayo and the natural increase in their lifespan after attaining the Manwu level. The laboratory that Ren Wanyan invested in also had some results. Regarding the repair of mitochondrial dysfunction, there has been some progress. If I reach the Manwu level, I can extend my lifespan by 30 years. I also have a direction for a coenzyme. If I succeed, I can extend my lifespan by another 10 years. Ren Wanyan was a little proud of himself when he talked about this matter. Increasing a person's lifespan was something that countless people dreamed of, and now, they were finally close to success. "Good," Renbachien praised. He didn't ask how much it cost. In any case, no matter how high the price was, the Ren family could still afford it. No matter how low the cost was, it was impossible to open it to ordinary people. Thanks to modern medical technology, the lifespan of ordinary people was about 85 to 90 years old, and manual experts could live up to 120 years old. Even though the birth rate wasn't high, the total population hadn't decreased. If another 40 years were added, it would be 160 years old. Unless a new habitable planet was discovered and there was no pressure on resources, it would be impossible to supply it to ordinary people. However, I'm not here for this matter this time. Ren Wanyan changed the topic with excitement in his eyes. The exploration spacecraft has returned. Ren Baqian paused for a moment. A few days ago, he was still pondering about the uncertain attitude of the Western countries regarding the third exploration spacecraft, but there was news so soon. He leaned forward slightly and asked, "What did you find?" The return of the exploration spacecraft proved that the curve nodes were correct, but Ren Wanyan looked so excited that there must be a major discovery. A brand new galaxy and 2 planets with intelligent life. Ren Wanyan raised his voice and emphasized the 2 planets with intelligent life. Even now, he couldn't suppress his excitement when he said this news. Phew! Ren Baqian heaved a sigh of relief. Even though his roots were in Deo, he was still excited when he heard this news. This was a real planet with intelligent life. Humans had taken a big step forward in this boundless universe. 2 planets with intelligent life represented endless new energy, new materials, and new technology. When humans arrived at those 2 planets, the development of human technology would be greatly improved. This was also very beneficial to him. New planet. Intelligent life. Can I go and take a look? Honeysuckle widened her eyes and asked with interest. Of course, but you have to wait a while. Ren Wanyan laughed. How long? Honeysuckle asked coquettishly. Not too long. 20 to 30 years should be enough. Based on Deo's time, it was only 10 years, which wasn't considered long. Only 1 spaceship returned. The first one. How long will it take to get there? Ren Baqian asked. It had only been 9 years since the first spacecraft entered the node. It would take at least 2 to 3 years to explore that new galaxy, which meant that it would take about 3 years for a one-way trip. The returning spacecraft is one of the second batch of 3, and it should take less than a year to jump to that galaxy. However, that node is said to distort time and space and affect electronic equipment. The records on the exploration spacecraft show that 7 years have passed in that new galaxy, but the time from entering to coming out of the node can't be calculated. I'm afraid that we will need to wait for the third batch of spacecraft to get an answer. There should be people accompanying the third batch of spacecraft. Ren Baqian's heart skipped a beat. It had only been 5 years since the second batch of spacecraft set off. It seemed that the equipment had indeed been affected. The exploration spacecraft also brought back a lot of information. Ren Wanyan pressed the watch on his wrist, and an image appeared in the air. This was a galaxy larger than the solar system. There were a total of 13 planets, 2 of which were similar. One was slightly larger and the other was slightly smaller. Blue and green areas could be seen on both of them. These must be the 2 planets with intelligent life. Between these 2 planets, there was a red satellite. There are 2 kinds of human-like creatures on these 2 planets, and they have developed a civilization. However, their level of civilization is much lower than ours and is equivalent to the level of a feudal dynasty. As images appeared, there were planets, continents, and buildings. Finally, a tall human-like creature with 2 horns on its head appeared in front of him. This kind of human-like creature is very strange. Ren Wanyan introduced. However, Ren Baqian's eyes widened and he cried out, "Thunder Barbarian." He subconsciously exerted force, and the sofa immediately shattered. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, Scholar House. Chapter 1149. Renbochin was dumbfounded as he looked at the human-like creature in the image. It had 2 horns on its head and was tall. Perhaps to highlight the characteristics of this creature, the image showed 2 creatures fighting with electricity flickering on their bodies. Wasn't this the Thunder Barbarian? Wasn't the Thunder Barbarian a foreign race from the 237 regions? How could there be Thunder Barbarians in a newly discovered galaxy? Ren Wanyan and Ren Xia were surprised to see such a big reaction from Renbochin. Both of them knew that Renbochin had a lot of secrets. After so many years, Renbochin didn't seem to have aged, which was enough to shock them. Ren Wanyan had also heard some things, but he had only heard a little from a few special department officials. When they realized that he wasn't clear, they kept their mouths shut. Seeing Renbochin's reaction, both of them were a little shocked. Before Ren Wanyan could say that this human-like creature had the ability to control thunder and lightning, Renbochin blurted out the name of the Thunder Barbarian. It was obvious that he knew this human-like creature. So this human-like creature is called the Thunder Barbarian. Ren Wanyan secretly noted it down and didn't ask any more questions. After so many years, Renbochin hadn't told him about this, presumably because he didn't want him to know. Maybe it's called the Thunder Barbarian, or maybe something else. Renbochin pressed a button on the table. After a while, someone came to clean up the sofa and moved in a new one. Not many people would keep a spare set of furniture at home, but Renbochin not only kept it at home, but also more than one. Renbochin sat back on the sofa and was silent for a long time. His mind was in a mess, and he almost thought that Xixiao had been discovered. However, the other planet told him that this wasn't the world where Deo was. There wasn't another habitable planet in that world. At such a close distance, it was impossible not to discover it if there was one. Also, the size of this planet wasn't right. According to the previous calculations of the exploration spacecraft, this planet was only half the size of Earth, and the other planet was only 20% larger than Earth. Great Xia, Deo, and the Qin nation covered an area that was close to half of Asia. The 60,000 mountains was even larger than this and was equivalent to a large continent. There were also the 237 regions. Although he didn't know how big they were, the distance was calculated by years. According to the laboratory calculations, Xixiao was at least 10 times the size of Earth. After thinking for a long time, Renbochin asked, "Are there also such human-like creatures on the other planet?" "No, it's something else." Ren Wanyan showed a set of pictures that were taken from top to bottom. The picture depicted a humanoid creature with 2 to 6 arms, the Ba Pu clan. Renbochin knew what they were at a glance. He did not expect that there would be Thunder Barbarians and 8 Arms race in this galaxy, and they belonged to 2 different planets. The 2 planets were dominated by these 2 humanoid creatures, and they had even built their own civilizations. In Deo, they were one of the tens of thousands of races. Previously, he had felt that it was very strange that there were myriad races there. No matter what, a world should not have given birth to so many intelligent life forms. Moreover, the population was not large, as if every life form could become an intelligent life form. But that was impossible. Based on the current situation, it was very likely that the myriad races were like these 2 races, coming from the outside world. Or, conversely, the 2 races in this galaxy came from Purple Cloud Earth star. Of course, the former was more likely. What about the human race? The language was similar to China's, and there were some mythical creatures that were similar to China's. Did the humans in that world come from Earth, or did the Chinese on Earth come from there? Or did both sides have other sources? Renbochin knew too little, and he couldn't figure out the main points no matter how hard he tried. He put this matter to the back of his mind first. At present, the most important thing was the matter of the new galaxy and the 2 foreign races. Take a look at the details of those 2 planets. Renbochin said. The planet where the Thunder Barbarians were located had a total of 4 continents. 3 of them were inhabited by the Thunder Barbarians, and the other one was too far away for the Thunder Barbarians to reach. There were only some wild creatures on it. The 3 continents combined weren't smaller than the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. However, there were very few cities, no more than 1,000, and they were scattered around like stars. Among them, there were 6 largest cities. In the cities, there were stone houses with pointed roofs and an iron needle on top. The tallest one was no more than 3 stories. Judging from the size of the cities, there were at most 1 million people. The other cities generally had tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people. The cities were surrounded by walls that were about 20 meters high, and there was a moat outside the cities. The main means of transportation were beast carriages. One was like a giant rhinoceros that was dozens of meters long, had a colorful body, and a horn on its head. In addition, there were several types of small beast carriages. The Thunder Barbarians were more developed in terms of animal husbandry, but the agricultural area didn't seem to be large. However, there were large areas of fruit forests around each city. There were pumpkin-sized fruits on the trees, which were probably the staple food of the Thunder Barbarians. In addition to the thousands of cities, there were also a large number of villages in the wilderness. The level of civilization development was roughly equivalent to that of the Tang and Song dynasties. The population was about a few hundred million, but no more than 1 billion. Looking at the Ba-Bai people, their technological level was actually higher than that of the Thunder Barbarians. Their buildings and clothes were more exquisite, and the area they lived in was smaller than that of the Thunder Barbarians. However, the number of cities they had was double that of the Thunder Barbarians. However, Renbachien knew that the development of these foreign races was different from that of Earth. The most important thing was individual strength. He didn't know how strong the experts on these 2 planets were. If they were like Xixiao, there would probably be existences that surpassed the Empress. If they wanted to occupy them, they would have to destroy the experts of the foreign races in the sky. If they occupied them on the ground, they would definitely be defeated by the other party. It was also very difficult to destroy the experts of the foreign races in the sky. It could be seen from the Empress's previous battles that she was extremely sensitive to danger at this stage. Unless a weapon of mass destruction like a nuclear bomb could produce considerable lethality in a large enough range, it might not be able to destroy the other party. After thinking about it, Renbachien smiled. He was used to seeing the foreign races. His first reaction when he saw them was how to destroy them. How to deal with them would depend on the plans of the governments of each country. Are there any videos of their battles? Renbachien asked. Yes, and 2 battles were filmed, Renbachien replied. Both battles belong to the Ba-Bai people. In the video, the 2 sides of the Ba-Bai people first drove huge beasts to charge into the battle formation, and then they exchanged blows. The weakest among them had 4 arms, and the generals of both sides had 6 arms. This was equivalent to the warriors of Longevity Heaven and Heaven Opening Domain. Renbachien nodded slightly. It was exactly as he thought. These 2 videos, as well as some scattered battle scenes, were definitely the main research direction of each country. In this way, the countries might not use force from the beginning. From a human's point of view, the other party was like looking at primitive people. However, when an individual's strength reached a certain level, it could cause great trouble for Earth. He estimated that the next time they went to that galaxy, the humans would first occupy the continent without the Thunder Barbarians, then find an opportunity to contact them. After understanding the various resources of that world, they would use economic plunder. Do you think there's a way for us to impersonate them? Renbachien suddenly asked. The Thunder Barbarians were very similar to humans, but they were taller. If they could think of a way to impersonate the Thunder Barbarians, then the Empress and the others would be much safer in that region. Impersonation. We don't even know what language they use. Their appearance is easy, but I don't know if they have any other way to identify us, Renbochin said. It's important to try when there's a chance, Renbochin said seriously. Well, I'll think of a way when there's a chance. First, we have to build a spacecraft and head there again. Those countries have been wavering, but I think they will be able to make up their minds this time. No country will allow itself to be excluded from the next exploration. Renbochin laughed. How long do you think it will take? Renbochin asked. It should be within 5 years, or even sooner. That node only reaches that galaxy. Are there any more nodes in that galaxy? According to Professor Luo Jiming's calculations, this is a whole curve with many nodes, and this node is only one of them. I'm not sure about the specifics, and I'm afraid even Professor Luo Jiming might not be fully aware of it, Ren Wanyan muttered. Renbochin knew that Professor Luo Jiming was a true genius among geniuses. He had extremely high achievements in physics, chemistry, and mathematics, and he was not even 45 years old yet. He was one of the most famous and highly regarded scientists in the country. If there was someone in this world who was born to be a protagonist, then Luo Jiming was definitely one of them. Many people wondered if he had been reborn, transmigrated, or had some sort of cheat. Currently, the domestic aviation exploration project was mainly led by him, and the country's protection for him was equivalent to that of an important national official. Renbochin pondered for a while and said, if there's a chance, arrange it. I want to pay him a visit. All right. Ren Wanyan nodded. It was very difficult for others to meet him, but he could still do it. Calm. Wonderful bookstore calm. Chapter 1150. Academician Luo. Renbochin greeted him. He had seen photos of this person on the internet, but it was his first time seeing him in person. He had to admit that this person was a natural winner in life. It was enough for him to earn a living with his face, but he had outstanding achievements in 3 fields. Some people had already compared him to Da Vinci. 43 years old, 1.8 meters tall, handsome and peaceful. Renbochin had a good impression of him. In addition, he was quite talented in cultivation and was only 1 step away from the earth wheel level. This was because he had put most of his energy into learning and research in these 3 fields. Mr. Ren, please take a seat. I have heard of you for a long time and have admired you for a long time. It's my first time seeing you today. Luo Jiming smiled. Renbochin was deep in thought. It seemed that Luo Jiming had something to ask him. After chatting for a while, Renbochin asked, in our universe, is the time in different places the same? There was an answer to this question on the internet, but he still wanted to hear it from Luo Jiming. According to the gravitational time dilation theory, the passage of time is different in different regions of potential energy. Luo Jiming then asked, Mr. Ren, are you asking this question because of the cave and the Horned Dragon Galaxy? Horned Dragon Galaxy. Mr. Ren, you may not have paid much attention to this. Now, that galaxy has been named the Horned Dragon Galaxy, Luo Jiming explained with a smile. Renbochin nodded and asked, does Academician Luo agree with this theory? It doesn't matter whether I agree or not. In fact, this is the real existence of this world, and experiments have proven it. Luo Jiming chuckled. He didn't say too much. For ordinary people, saying too much would only make them more confused. Renbochin nodded and finally understood. Originally, he thought that Zixia planet and the 2 races were in another world, which was why the time flow was different. Now, it seemed that he didn't understand this aspect. In other words, Zixia planet and Earth might also be in the same universe, but they were very far apart. Then, Renbochin asked about curves and nodes, and Luo Jiming answered them one by one. There were still some questions he wanted to ask, but they involved too many things. After thinking about it, Renbochin gave up. Instead, it answered Luo Jiming's question about the so-called grotto heaven, which made Luo Jiming thoughtful. Renbaqian didn't hide too much and told Luo Jiming that there were also suns, moons, and stars there. This led Luo Jiming to guess that it was a different planet in the universe, just like that galaxy. On the contrary, Luo Jiming was rather interested in how Renbaqian got through the winter. It was a pity that he couldn't divulge this information. The two of them had another meal, and it could be said that they had developed a little friendship. Perhaps they would meet again in the future. If possible, Renbaqian really wanted to kidnap him and bring him back to Dayo. With such a person around, Dayo's progress might improve by a lot. Unfortunately, he also knew that if it was someone else, the country might be able to tolerate it. But this person in front of him, the country could not afford to lose. Another ancient tomb. How many times has this happened in the past few years? Renbaqian was slightly stunned when he heard the news when he returned to Dayo. The 13th in 5 years. A big man from the Jing tribe said. Renbaqian tapped his fingers on the table and laughed. A storm is brewing, and these ancient tombs are coming out at the right time. In the past 100 years, there wasn't a single ancient tomb that appeared. However, over a dozen ancient tombs had actually appeared in the past few years. No one would believe that there was nothing strange about it. However, one couldn't find any evidence for this kind of thing. The experts from thousands of years ago couldn't possibly know that they were coming, right? They also couldn't possibly know that the humans were going to fight the foreign races again, right? In the end, it could only be attributed to metaphysics and luck. Now that the humans were coming out, these ancient tombs were also appearing one after another. It had to be said that some things in this world were really difficult to explain with science. The righteous sect will still be the leader, and the commandery will send people to cooperate, Renbaqian said. Yes. After they left, Renbaqian thought about some things, but he still couldn't figure out the reason or mechanism. He took the next document. It was about the route from the capital to Yi City that was about to open. A plane would take off the day after tomorrow to set the route. In fact, there were no other planes in the sky at the moment. As long as they didn't collide, they could fly however they wanted. However, there were many ferocious beasts in the sky, and there would be many planes in the future. Therefore, the route had to be planned from the beginning. The plane that would take off the day after tomorrow would be the first test flight to plan the route to avoid any problems in the future. Yi City was the last city before entering the 60,000 mountains. It wasn't considered big at first, but the inhabitants of the 60,000 mountains came out to trade for goods, which resulted in the rise of such a city. However, during the war with Great Xia and the Yun nation, there were almost no foreign caravans, and Yi City declined. Now that the Protectorate of the South had moved to the 60,000 mountains, Yi City had prospered again and was much more prosperous than before. Now that Yi City had been expanded once, there were about 150,000 permanent residents in the city. There was a cement road leading directly to Lan City, and the railway was about to be completed in another year. With the opening of the route, it was conceivable that Yi City would become even more prosperous in the future, second only to the capital, Lan City, Ping City where the Protectorate of the Yun nation was located, and the former capital of the Yun nation, Wang capital. With the opening of several transportation routes, the transportation of precious goods from the 60,000 mountains would be faster in the future, and the volume of transportation would also increase. Of course, the most important thing was still to transport goods from the outside into the 60,000 mountains. Only in this way could the sphere of influence of the Protectorate of the South continue to extend deep into the mountains all the way to the Wall of Two Worlds. 2 days later, Renbaqian, Tong Zhenye, and Zhu Zhuo, the director of the Department of Commerce, arrived at a huge plain outside the capital. The airport had been fenced off with barbed wire. Inside, there was a small terminal, a lighthouse, and other buildings, as well as 3 airplanes parked inside. The 3 airplanes were 31 meters long, and they were the model of the Flower Eagle 13. The prototype was the C-130 Hercules from the 1950s on Earth. Even in the early 21st century, it was still the main airliner of many countries, which showed the success of this model. Due to the difference in alloy materials and performance, the three airplanes were 32 meters long and 12.2 meters tall. They flew at 700 kilometers per hour, cruised at 620 kilometers per hour, weighed 31 tons, could carry 22 tons, and had a maximum takeoff weight of 73 tons. There were 9 crew members. In addition to the pilot, co-pilot, navigation, navigator, and loading and unloading captain, there were also 4 archers who were at the advanced level of the Kismet Heaven realm. 4 sealed cabins of 1.5 square meters could be opened on the sides and rear of the airplanes. When flying at an altitude of less than 5,000 meters, these 4 people could attack from the sealed cabins. This altitude was the limit of the airplane's flight speed so that their bodies wouldn't freeze or be blown away. This was to prevent flying beasts from invading the airplane's flight path and treating them as prey or toys. After all, there were too many ferocious beasts in this world. Many large flying beasts weren't even smaller than airplanes. Fortunately, these flying beasts generally flew at an altitude of less than 4,000 meters, and most of them were even less than 2,000 meters. After the crew members greeted Renbachien and the others, they boarded the plane one after another. In addition to them, there were 2 other students from the academy going together. As the plane started up, it streaked across the long runway, rose into the sky under the excited gazes of all the airport staff. With this thing, it will be more convenient to transport all kinds of materials in the future. Zhuzhua sighed and then asked, "Can this thing also transport people?" Renbachien nodded and said, "There are still too few of them, mainly in the south. Sooner or later, our flight path will cover the entire continent. Ordinary people will take this plane to travel, and most regions will only take a few hours to reach. I'm really looking forward to it." Zhuzhua laughed. "Aren't there smaller planes? I heard that they are much more flexible and can even fight with flying beasts in the air." Tong Jinya asked curiously. "That thing is still open. The main thing is that there are no external weapons. At present, we still have to rely on bows and arrows to attack flying beasts." Renbachien said. There was gunpowder in this world, and Great Xia had used it before, but its performance was too poor. At present, the main direction of research wasn't on weapons. Moreover, there was a shortage of manpower, and gunpowder weapons were too weak to be of much use in future wars. Therefore, there were only 2 researchers in this area. With a small number of people, the progress was naturally slow. The reason why they were still conducting research was that Renbachien had a glimmer of hope that they might discover something valuable during the research process. Renbachien was looking forward to the miniaturization of electromagnetic weapons, which could pose a threat to experts. The fastest updated website on August 1. Chapter 1151. This is the capital. A lady with a wide forehead and a big mouth sat behind a tractor, looking at the towering city in the distance. Her words were full of emotion. She had a wide forehead and a big mouth, but when put together, no one could find any fault with them. She was 25 or 26 years old and dressed ordinarily, but she was unforgettable. Her eyes were as bright as the stars. Beside her were a man and a woman. The man was strong, and the woman was wild. One look and they could tell that she was an aboriginal. "I haven't been back for a long time. There weren't so many cars in the past." The man looked around. On the 10-lane road from the capital to Lawn City, there were all kinds of tractors and trucks. Now, there were a few more models of tractors and trucks. In addition, he could occasionally see a large vehicle called a bus, which was full of people. There were even a few people sitting on the roof, looking at the city in the distance in amazement. I designed the tires of this tractor, the man boasted. If I hadn't shouldered the heavy responsibility of going to Great Xia, I would have been behind these vehicles. If he said this in another place, he would most likely be greeted with admiring gazes. However, at this moment, only the Aboriginal lady beside him kicked him and shouted, "Du Lao Lu, are you done? How many times have you said this along the way?" Lao Lu has indeed contributed a lot. The changes in Deo can't be separated from your contributions. The other lady pursed her lips and smiled elegantly. Lao Lu, are you two familiar with each other? The Aboriginal lady said angrily and kicked Du Lao Lu again. Very familiar. In any case, we are classmates. The lady chuckled. Her eyes were shining, and she seemed to enjoy watching the two of them play around. Or rather, one of them was fighting while the other was playing around. Qing Lian, are you really not going back? Du Lao Lu, who was used to being kicked and beaten, turned to ask the lady. Seeing this scene, the Aboriginal lady was even more furious. She gritted her teeth and made up her mind that she wouldn't let him off when they got home. The Aboriginal lady was Du Lao's wife, Tu Yu. She had followed Du Lao Lu to Great Xia and returned together after 4 years. The other lady was Qing Lian. Qing Lian shook her head slightly and chuckled. Anyway, you don't need me anymore. There's no difference if I'm here or not. I should do what I want to do. After saying those words, he raised his head and looked into the distance with a slightly disappointed expression. Who would have thought that it would end up like this? He had planned for so many years and experienced so many trials and tribulations, but he did not know what it was all for. However, this was something that they had long expected. Ever since the Great Xia royal family produced a character who could split open the heaven and earth domain, they had already predicted that this day would come. Although that person was greatly restricted and couldn't go far, it was enough to stop the revolutionary army. After emptying her mind, Qing Lian focused her attention on the imperial capital that was getting closer and closer. She smiled and asked, I heard that your highness is moving the wealthy families from the 100 cities to the imperial capital? I don't know about this. I haven't been back for a few years. Du Lao Lu shook his head. He had always been in Great Xia and didn't know about this. As they entered the imperial capital, there were more and more pedestrians on the road, especially on both sides of the road. Even at the periphery, it was still bustling. There were all kinds of shops around the city. Large amounts of goods were unloaded here and distributed to various shops in the city. Pedestrians, laborers, peddlers, shopkeepers, haggling, clamoring, and cursing filled the air. One of the shops was used to load all kinds of vegetables and fruits. After being loaded into trucks, they were sent straight to the city. A few laborers casually nibbled on the fruits before continuing with their work. It was a lively scene. There were vendors selling roasted sweet potatoes, roasted meat, and meat soup on the roadside. Smoke was drifting out from the buildings on both sides of the road. One could smell stewed meat and all kinds of fragrances. The combination of the two smells rushed straight into the nostrils and tempted one's appetite. I'm hungry. I can finally have a good meal. Du Lao Lu rubbed his stomach. Is Great Xia's cuisine not as good as Dao's? Qing Lian laughed. It's not as good as Dao's. Du Lao Lu said decisively. Qing Lian smiled without saying a word. Dao's cuisine was filled with good spices. The fragrance of the food was overwhelming, but it masked the freshness of the food itself. Great Xia's cuisine rarely used spices. Instead, it focused more on highlighting the taste of the food itself. It could only be said that everyone had their own preferences. However, when it came to meat, Dao had all kinds of spices that could suppress the fishy smell, which was slightly better than Great Xia's. Where are you going? Are you going to see the dean first? Du Laolu asked and got kicked again. No, I'm going to walk around the city first. I'll pay a visit tomorrow. Qing Lian shook her head slightly, cupped her hands, and bade farewell to the two of them. She then jumped off the tractor. She wanted to see what the capital looked like. Naturally, she had to see it with her own eyes. Still looking. Tu Yu saw that Du Laolu was still looking even after Qing Lian got off the tractor. I just feel that she's a little pitiful. Du Laolu shook his head. Even though he was a little funny, arrogant, and carefree, he wasn't completely blind. Along the way, he could naturally see that Qing Lian was disappointed from time to time. Furthermore, she had left everything behind and came to Dao alone. It was probably not going well for her. How do you know that she's pitiful? And that it has something to do with you? Tu Yu said angrily. I'm the pitiful one. How did I fall for you back then? Because I'm smart. Du Laolu grinned, revealing a set of white teeth that were even reflecting light. Pfft, I'll go to the palace first. Du Laolu said as he held on to his cloth bag. Go back and let them cook the meat first. Ren Baqian was a little surprised to hear that Du Laolu was back. This time, he didn't receive any news from the rearguard commandery. As far as he knew, there hadn't been anything going on with the Du family recently. He didn't know if Du Laolu had found what he wanted or if he simply wanted to come back to take a look. However, he would find out when he saw Du Laolu. Lowly, after years of universal education, the national treasury is running low. I'm afraid that we will be in the red this year by 30%. What do you think? Ren Baqian looked at the lowly in front of him. 3 years had passed, and the image of this artificial intelligence hadn't changed at all. Her personality was still as bad as before. At this moment, she was drawing circles on her lips with her finger, and her eyes were blurry. Fortunately, he wasn't a lolicon. Seeing that Ren Baqian was asking about serious matters, the lowly winked at him and pulled down her collar. Anyway, it was just a flat screen, and it wouldn't be obvious if she didn't pull it down. If we want to enrich the national treasury, open up new sources of revenue, or reduce expenditure, the number of officials in Dao isn't overstaffed. In fact, it can be said that there is still a huge shortage. For example, the transportation department and the commercial department are still understaffed. With the current number of soldiers, it is difficult to maintain a large area in the 60,000 mountains, so reducing expenditure isn't advisable. In that case, what we need to do is to open up new sources of revenue. If we want to open up new sources of revenue, firstly, tax, and secondly, commodities. Currently, the domestic situation is stable, and the Chuyun residence is also stable. If we raise taxes, it will definitely cause an uproar. As for commodities, the current number of craftsmen and factory personnel is barely enough, and we really can't develop new products. Moreover, even if we manage to produce 1 or 2 products, it won't be able to make up for the current deficit. I know all of this, Ren Baqian said in a deep voice. However, there are still a few ways. First, we can use government bonds, which I don't think anyone will be willing to buy. Lottery tickets are not bad, but Dao doesn't prohibit gambling. This amount of money will be collected by the casino and the people behind it, and it will be better to give it to the imperial court. Another way is the Qin nation and Great Xia. Even though Great Xia isn't unified yet, the imperial court and the revolutionary army have already divided their territories, and it will be difficult for there to be any big changes for a period of time. Moreover, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. After 10 years of continuous war, a large amount of wealth has gathered in the hands of a small number of people. Ren Baqian was moved and asked, how do we do it? As long as we sell the goods there. The people of Great Xia have a huge demand for Dao's goods. In the past, the borders of Dao were unstable, so they could still restrain themselves a little. Now that the two countries have divided their territories and the situation has stabilized, the demand will shift to other areas. We just need to sell some of the goods that were originally supplied to the country to those who have amassed a lot of wealth. However, there is one thing that must be settled in Dayo's currency. After that, we will use paper money to purchase a lot of goods. In this way, whether it's Great Xia or the Yun nation, we will only be creating wealth for the imperial court for a few years or decades. Renbaqian thought about it and roughly understood Lolita's thinking. The value of money was given by people, regardless of whether it was gold or silver. The value of Dayo's currency was even more obvious. Nowadays, large transactions were completely done with paper money, which could be printed as much as one wanted. However, for the stability of domestic prices, the imperial court couldn't print more paper money than it could bear. Otherwise, the country's newly formed and fragile economic system would inevitably collapse. However, if they had to use paper money to trade with the Qin nation and Great Xia, they would first have to exchange gold and silver for paper money. This exchange rate was set by the imperial court, and they could profit from it. The same was true for the purchase of goods in the two countries. In this way, they would earn gold, silver, and goods, but they would only circulate paper money in their hands. They could use this method to increase the amount of money issued, which would be consumed by the two countries, and the imperial court would naturally gain a lot of profits. The imperial court had already benefited greatly from the increase in the amount of money issued. After a few years, the currencies of the two countries were basically controlled by Dayo. This way, they could gain a lot of profits from the two countries by manipulating the rise and fall of the currencies. If they were more ruthless, they could completely design a separate currency to be issued in the two countries to plunder resources and profits. This kind of economic plunder was faster than robbing with a knife. After a few years, it would be these two countries that would support Dayo. Of course, there were a few important points. First, the other party had to recognize this kind of currency. Second, the currency wouldn't be imitated. However, these 2 points weren't a problem for him. First of all, they might not understand the main points. Even if there were knowledgeable people who felt that something was wrong, they had to recognize Dayo's paper money under the pressure of the army, whether they were willing or not. Furthermore, Dayo's paper money was exquisitely made and easy to carry. Under strong pressure, it would probably circulate quickly between the two countries. There was no need to consider counterfeiting as they didn't have the strength to do so. After he understood, he asked for more details. It was more or less the same as what he thought. Renbaqian also made up his mind. First, he set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Chapter 1152. Your Highness. When Du Laolu saw Renbaqian, he suddenly felt sad. He finally saw the dean again. To be more precise, he was finally back. Back then, the dean sent him far away with just 1 sentence. At first, he thought it was good, but after a long time, he began to miss his hometown. If he hadn't found what he was looking for this time, he didn't know how long he would have been wandering outside. You seem to have matured. Renbaqian sighed and then looked at him strangely. Have you reached Kismet heaven? One had to know that Du Laolu wasn't very talented. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent to the academy. Although reaching Kismet heaven in his 20s wasn't considered fast, it wasn't too bad either. I fought a lot during my trip to Great Xia and broke through during one of those fights. Du Laolu was a little excited. He came back this time to show those bastards that he had also broken through to Kismet heaven. Life and death situations help to tap one's potential. Renbaqian sighed. With Du Laolu's poor talent, it was rare for him to reach Kismet heaven in such a short period of time after going through many hardships. This was probably why Du Laolu looked much calmer. Du Laolu had a strange expression on his face. When Tuyu knocked someone down, he ran over and kicked them a few times because they were rude. After a few kicks, he inexplicably broke through. How could he have gone through life and death situations? Of course, he couldn't say this out loud. Instead, he puffed out his chest and said, "Although the journey was difficult, I finally achieved my goal and obtained something. I just don't know if it's the scroll that your highness needs. Bring it to me." Ren Baqian said. Du Laolu took out an ancient scroll made of animal hide, placed it on the table, and took a few steps back. Ren Baqian reached out to take it. The surface of the animal hide was extremely delicate and soft, and it felt very familiar. He flipped to the front page and saw the words, "All laws are one and the same." These 10 words twisted endlessly as if they were going to jump out of the page. When he focused, he saw the words twisting out and entering his sea of knowledge. It's indeed the ancient scroll of methods. Ren Baqian closed the ancient scroll, closed his eyes, and erased the words in his sea of knowledge. There were 3 scrolls in the ancient scroll of methods. The first was the method of refining the body and the 5 elements visualization. The second scroll was the art of nourishing and cultivating the spirit. Since he had not even reached the earth embryo realm, he could only read a part of it. There should be a cultivation method for the spirit world realm at the back, and it should be able to open up the heaven and earth domain. Due to his lack of strength, he was unable to see what was going on, so he could only make guesses. The third scroll contained all sorts of wondrous techniques and battle techniques. Now that the third volume was in his hands, his set of techniques was finally complete. He looked down at Du Laolu, smiled, and said, "You are indeed a lucky general." Without a goal, he actually managed to get his hands on the ancient scroll of methods in just 4 years. Du Laolu grinned as he accepted Ren Baqian's praise. "You haven't been back for many years. Go back and rest for a few days, and I will arrange something for you to do." Ren Baqian smiled as he thought about where to send Du Laolu. A person with such great luck would naturally have the help of the heavens. It would be best to leave some clueless matters to him. Ren Baqian couldn't make up his mind because there were too many places where he could be of use. Scientific research naturally required a certain amount of luck, and he could also be used in the search for ores and resources. There was also the map obtained from the tomb of the human emperor, or he could go out to sea to look for shipping routes. There might be unexpected gains. As for the Empress, he should be able to play a certain role if he was sent there. From the current situation, Du Laolu was just extremely lucky, but he wasn't the kind of person who could resist the heavens and earth. Sending him there wouldn't bring danger to the Empress and the others, and he might even be able to play a big role. "Your Highness, Qinglian has also arrived in the capital. She probably won't return to the volunteer army," Du Laolu said before leaving. Ren Baqian nodded. Currently, neither the Great Xia Imperial Court nor the volunteer army could do anything to the other. There was a practitioner in the Great Xia Imperial Court who had reached the level of opening up heaven and earth, but he was restricted by some unknown restrictions and couldn't go far. With such a person around, the volunteer army couldn't overthrow the Great Xia Imperial Court. In this way, both sides would stabilize the occupied territory, divide the land, and think of other ways in the future. For Deo, this was good news. As for Qinglian, her goal had never been to be a high official and generous salary. She had other desires. Now that both sides had divided the land, there was no point for her to stay there, so she might as well come to Deo. Ren Baqian naturally understood what was going on, which was why he was happy. Qinglian could be said to be a great talent. She was shrewd, resourceful, and extremely talented in mathematics. There were a lot of positions that she could get involved in. Furthermore, based on his understanding of her, she was trustworthy and wasn't someone with ulterior motives. Now, he was in desperate need of talents, and he was naturally happy that such a talent had come to him. Renbochin stuffed the ancient scroll into his pocket and was ready to return to his bedroom to read it properly. However, he met Xianzhe on his way back. Seeing that she seemed to have something on and couldn't speak, Renbochin asked, "General Xianzhe, are you looking for me? I just wanted to ask if the electric shock experiment still needs to be done." Xianzhe said in a cold voice as her gaze wandered behind her glasses. Renbochin's body stiffened slightly. It seemed that Xianzhe had asked him once a few days ago. All these years, he had also conducted several electric shock experiments on Xianzhe, about once a year, and it seemed to have become a regular pattern. Seeing that Xianzhe's cold face was slightly red, her gaze wandered, and she forced herself to remain calm. Renbochin found it funny and said, "The experiment still needs to be done. The data isn't enough, and the fluctuations are too big each time." A moment later, the two of them were in a side hall. Xianzhe put her armor and glasses aside, sat on the electric chair in a sports vest and tights, and allowed Renbochin to connect the electrodes to her body. Without her glasses, she couldn't distinguish between a man and a woman if she was more than 2 meters tall, and she couldn't distinguish between a man and a beast if she was more than 5 meters tall. Moreover, she had worn her glasses for a long time, and taking them off suddenly made her feel extremely unsafe, making her feel uneasy. She then felt the cold touch of the electrodes on her body and knew that the prince was looking at her. There was an indescribable feeling of anticipation in her heart, which made her feel shy and a little excited at the same time. As the switch was pressed and the intensity of the electric current was increased, Xianzhe couldn't help but let out a light moan, and the surface of her skin turned rosy. 20 minutes later, Xianzhe let out a long, mellow moan that sounded like she was crying. Her muscles tightened for a moment before she slumped there without any strength. Renbochin saw that Xianzhe's eyes were blurry and that her body was flushed. He knew that she probably wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. He had to admit that Xianzhe was extremely attractive at the moment. She was like a ripe fruit with a fragrant smell that made people want to pluck it and taste it. Such a woman made people want to conquer her. Fortunately, Renbochin had good self-control. Most importantly, he knew that rabbits wouldn't eat the grass near their nests, especially when this grass was particularly obvious. After removing the electrodes and putting away the equipment, he said, "General Xianzhe, take a rest first. I'll go back and record the data." He turned around and returned to his bedroom. After Renbochin left, Xianzhe heaved a long sigh of relief. Her thoughts were light as a feather, as if they could float with the wind. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1153. Renbochin opened the ancient scroll of methods once again and looked at it with rapt attention. He saw the 10 words on the first page wriggling incessantly on the animal skin. Following which, the words separated from the animal skin and entered his sea of knowledge, evolving into a set of methods to deal with the enemy. Or it could be said that there were several simple uses of the divine sense. Most importantly, there was a method to temper one's divine sense. Spiritual sense spread throughout the sea of consciousness. It was the foundation of a person. If it was not condensed into a divine weapon, it would be like smoke when it left the body, uncontrollable. This technique allowed one's divine sense to form an invisible arrow before it could be condensed into a divine weapon to attack the opponent's divine sense. The second volume of the ancient scroll of methods was to nurture and refine the spirit. Nurture first, then refine. The nurturing art was naturally to strengthen the divine sense, while the refining art was to purify and condense the divine sense. This was especially so for the nurturing path, which required one to start cultivating from the earth will level. Therefore, those who cultivated this technique had a much stronger divine sense than others of the same cultivation level. Only then could they use this divine sense attack method. The method of tempering that part of the divine sense wasn't a refining technique, but a simplified version of it. When one was at the earth will level, it would be able to resonate with the method of condensing the shapeless arrows and produce 3 shapeless arrows. This was also the only attack method of this technique before the Earth embryo. After reaching the Earth embryo realm, there would be 5 more ways to attack the 5 elements. He would use his consciousness to evolve the 5 elements and leave his body. Among them, there were also the 5 words, eternity depends on one's heart. Only when one's heart was resolute could one achieve eternity. To put it simply, it was a firm belief. In the Earth embryo realm, the 5 elements could only be evolved into one thing. Only by having a firm belief in it would one be able to concentrate and turn illusion into reality. This was all that Rinpoche could see at the moment, and he gasped in amazement. This method of turning illusions into reality, using one's divine sense to communicate with one's primordial chi and turn it into matter, was indeed miraculous. Although it was similar to condensing a divine armament, there were many more ways to do it. Furthermore, this was only the Earth embryo realm. Once he attained the spirit will realm, it was unknown what kind of techniques he would have. If this technique was cultivated to the extreme, it was unknown whether or not it could condense a nuclear bomb. One had to know that when one reached the Earth chakra level, they would visualize the 5 elements. However, what Rinpoche visualized was a universe. He didn't know what kind of changes would occur in the future. However, he seemed to have a lot of potential. Materializing a world was something he did not even dare to think about, nor was it possible. However, if he continued to cultivate, he might be able to regain his authority as a husband one day. When Rinpoche thought of this, he felt great. Just as he was about to enter visualization, he felt as if there was an additional hole in the palace. All the air was pouring into that hole. When he sensed it again, he realized that it was the palace where 2 flowers lived. Has Duo Hua reached the cardinal heaven level? Rinpoche looked up at the sky and saw that it was already dark. He hurriedly left the palace and headed in the direction of the hole. Your Highness. He saw Aksayan just standing in front of the palace courtyard. There was no lingering emotion on her face, and there was no change in her gaze either. It was as if nothing had happened. Is it Hua? Rinpoche asked immediately. Yes, Princess. Aksayan replied. To advance to the cardinal heaven level. Rinpoche asked again. This was the first time he was in close contact with someone who had advanced to the cardinal heaven stage. Princess has long reached perfection. Today, you have finally broken through that obstacle. Now, the chi and blood in your body have fused together with your vital energy, turning into blood essence. Your Highness should instruct the imperial kitchen to prepare more food. After all, the princess is hungry now. Rinpoche nodded and gave the order. Immediately, someone went to inform them. Duo Hua needed to prepare at least 500 kilograms of meat to replenish the chi and blood in his body for this breakthrough. Rinpoche stood in front of the palace and waited for Duo Hua to complete his breakthrough. After standing there for a while, he suddenly felt something moving under his feet. He carefully sensed it for a long time before he realized that when Duo Hua broke through to the cardinal heaven level, not only did the wind and clouds move, but the earth fetus also moved. The earth was like a living creature that breathed in and out vital energy. So this is the movement of the earth fetus. No wonder it's called the earth fetus. Rinpoche was overjoyed and laughed loudly. He originally thought that he would need to accumulate a little more, but he didn't expect it to happen so naturally now. After walking through the path of heaven, one's divine sense could communicate with the vital energy of heaven and earth, ignite the wisdom palace, and reach the spirit will level. He already knew about this. At this stage, one's divine sense was the main focus and was no longer the same as an ordinary person. Before reaching the path of heaven, one would first be able to feel the earth fetus move automatically. Their heart would be one with the earth and move in accordance with the earth fetus. This would be the foundation for communicating with heaven and earth. Therefore, the top level of the earth will level was also known as the earth fetus level. Renbachian had been accumulating and using countless precious herbs. Even though he was busy with work, he still took time out every day to take a medicinal bath and visualize. Today, when Duo Hua broke through, the earth fetus moved more intensely than usual, and he could feel the location of the earth fetus. After that, Renbachian sat cross-legged on the ground and began to visualize. The vital energy in his body suddenly condensed into a ball and moved along with the earth fetus. His qi and blood began to transform into vital energy and attach to the essence fetus pill in his body. Wisps of earth fetus entered Renbachian's sea of knowledge and floated in the boundless universe in his sea of knowledge. A portion of the vital energy that swept toward the palace hall was diverted into Renbachian's body. Seeing this scene, Exanjo was a little surprised. After looking at it for a moment, a smile appeared on her face. She turned around and asked someone to inform the imperial kitchen to prepare more meat. The two of them were absorbing vital energy here after breaking through. For a moment, two tornadoes, one big and one small, formed above the palace and sucked in all the air in the area. Although it was only limited to the palace, many people outside could sense it. Tong Jinye sat in his room, sensed it for a moment, and grinned. The big one is the princess, and the other is breaking through to the harmonious realm. Only Zhao Prince Consort can cause such a strange phenomenon. Zhao Prince Consort's cultivation speed isn't slow, but the princess is only 8 years old this year. Such talent is rare, and I have to prepare a generous gift for her tomorrow. Qing Lian was in the Honglu bureau. The long centipede on her back silently leaped out and stood in front of Qing Lian, trembling slightly. Oh! Someone in the palace has broken through to the cardinal heaven level. I don't know who it is, but I heard that the princess was born with the strength of a Kismet heaven expert and is extremely talented. It must be her. I have to find out more. Qing Lian was far away, and the flying sword only sensed that someone was absorbing vital energy in that direction. She didn't expect it to be two people breaking through. However, Renbachian was only breaking through to the harmonious realm. Although the earth embryo realm was important, it wasn't worth too much attention. If he broke through to the spirit will level, then it would be considered a big deal. After 2 hours, the palace gradually stopped absorbing vital energy. When Erhua walked out of the palace, Renbachian also slowly stopped. Father. Erhua's eyes were clear and sparkling like the stars. Renbachian stood up and smiled. I'm borrowing your light. I'm hungry. Erhua's face twitched, and he emphasized, I'm starving to death. A thunderous voice sounded from inside Erhua's body. Inform the imperial kitchen to send the meat here. Just send it here. Renbachian laughed. After obtaining the fighting techniques from the ancient scroll of methods, Qing Lian jumped into the bowl, and Erhua and he had broken through. This was a happy occasion that needed to be celebrated. If the Empress was here, she would definitely be happy and congratulate them. Now that she was far away, he could only let her know through the radio. After the court session ended the next day, the important officials sent gifts to congratulate the princess on breaking through to the cardinal heaven level. Reaching the cardinal heaven level at the age of 10, and she might even be stronger than the Empress in the future, was naturally worth celebrating. Renbachian simply waved his hand and held a banquet in the palace that night. He met Qing Lian in the afternoon. Sure enough, as expected, the Revolutionary Army and the Imperial Court of Great Xia were divided. Neither side could do anything to the other, and the situation had temporarily stabilized. Qing Lian saw that she had no hopes for fame and fortune, so she simply abandoned Su Qing and came to Deo to study mathematics. Renbachian originally wanted her to take up a position, but after discussing it with her, he agreed to let her teach at the Black Bamboo Academy. She would teach advanced mathematics and research mathematics at the same time. At the same time, she would be able to participate in some of the experiments and research at the academy. She was mainly in charge of mathematical calculations, which was of great use and could promote a lot of research progress. She was originally a classmate and the last transfer student to arrive, but now, she had become a mathematics teacher. Naturally, this caused some trouble in the academy. In particular, Tong Lan, who had never been on good terms with her and even fought with her, almost broke her teeth from gritting them. Hua had to stay at home for half a month to control her increased strength. With this breakthrough, Hua's strength increased by more than 500 kilograms, and the power that she could unleash when she attacked increased several times. On the other hand, Renbaqian's strength didn't increase by much, only 100 kilograms. However, he still needed a few days to feel the pulse of the earth and stabilize his realm. Chapter 1154. On a mountain 50 kilometers away from the Wall of Two Worlds, the Empress was sitting in red. Behind her were the ferocious men from the martial arts hall, and not far in front of her were Li Fu and the others. Among them, the most eye-catching person was the one sitting cross-legged beside the Empress. He was covered in black armor, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. There was only a ball of essence and blood protecting his chest that pulsed like thunder every 2 hours. His blood was like a river that had opened the floodgates. It flowed through Decan's body with a rolling sound and then returned to his chest. It was hard to detect from afar, but it was hard to even look at this person up close. It felt like the power in this person's body was like a volcano that could erupt at any time. This was the remnant body of the human emperor. It could be used 3 times and had 70% of its power at its peak. Even 70% of the human emperor's power was far greater than longevity heaven's. It could be said that he was the Empress's greatest reliance on this trip. The others didn't know that this was a remnant body, but they couldn't look at it directly when they got closer. They were secretly surprised and didn't know who this person was. "Do you mean that the news has been leaked?" The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked. 3 months ago, a foreign tribe went to the Qianggu tribe from the mountains and then left the tribe overnight to go to the outside world. Although they didn't get close, judging from their speed, they were using herdsmen. After that, the Qianggu tribe and the Earth Spirit tribe searched this area several times. We felt that something was wrong and retreated in time, so we weren't discovered by them. However, we couldn't hide the traces we left at the Wall of Two Worlds, and they already knew about it. We found an opportunity to catch a few of their hunting tribesmen. As expected, they already knew about our existence and were searching for us, Jiang Zixi said. The Qianggu tribe was the foreign tribe with a scorpion tail and a row of bone spikes on its back. The tribe that was good at domesticating beasts called themselves the Earth Spirit tribe. Li Fu, Jiang Zixi, and the others found out about this after catching people from the 2 tribes. The Empress's face darkened. They had spent so much effort but still couldn't seal the aura. "Do you know how long it will take for the herdsmen to come after they go to inform us?" Jiang Zixi said, "I don't know. The outside world is boundless, and the people we caught are the juniors of the foreign tribes. They don't know the specific situation of the outside world. They only knew from the caravan that they had to travel south for half a month to leave the barren land, where there were several tribes. If we can destroy these 2 tribes, we can get some information from the foreign experts. Moreover, after destroying these 2 tribes, the Wall of Two Realms will be completely opened, and we will only need to guard 2 gaps. That Earth Spirit tribe has a longevity heaven expert and a ferocious beast with longevity heaven strength. In addition, there were 22 cardinal heaven level foreign races and ferocious beasts. The Thousand Bone tribe had 3 longevity heaven experts and 13 cardinal heaven experts. The Empress said, "We have moved from the human spirit experts from the barren land, Shiv, worlds, from, and, spirit and king, Qi. As he spoke, Jiang Zixi's gaze fell on the remains of the human emperor from time to time. If this person were to take action, it would not be difficult to exterminate these two tribes. Although, dragon, the spirit was, spirit, the emperor, world's king, and of the god. King dynasty's spirit, world's king, the dragon of spirit, star, god, thousand, and Wu. They must be used to fight against the enemy, not to be wasted here. Although two more people had entered the heaven and earth territory, including him and Li Fu, there were 4 people. However, other than him who had reached the intermediate level, the others had only just entered the heaven and earth territory. They didn't know how long those foreign tribes had been in the longevity heaven realm, and they didn't know if there were any high-level longevity heaven experts. If they wanted to destroy the foreign tribes, it would be too dangerous, and they would suffer heavy casualties. There were only so many human elites. Every one of them was a seed and couldn't be killed easily. Now, the first thing to do was to cross the wall of 2 worlds and cultivate for a few years. Then, some of them would enter the heaven opening region. It would be best if they could reach the high-level longevity heaven before coming back to destroy these 2 foreign tribes. At the thought of this, the Empress told them directly. After all, except for the martial arts hall, the others belonged to the Go Home organization and the Temple of Heaven, so it was difficult for them to make a decision. Even though the Empress was tough in the past, everyone here was an elite of the human race. They were here to fight against the foreign races. Even though she could suppress them now, there was no telling what kind of trouble they might cause in the future. The Empress was well aware of this. After hearing what the Empress said, no one objected and agreed with her. In this case, we only have 2 choices. One is to cross the wall of 2 worlds and find a place nearby to cultivate. We will come back to replenish our food and water from time to time. The second choice is to cross the barren land and find a place to cultivate. Although we can't come back to replenish our food, there are tribes there, so we don't have to worry about resources. Tang Gu and Donghua Sun are both good at concealing their tracks. After they go out, they can also check out the situation in the outside world and the strength of the foreign tribes. With our speed, it naturally won't take as long as half a month. If everything goes according to plan, we can reach there in 2 or 3 days at most. However, we can't stay in the outside world for too long and can't be too far away from those tribes, in case the experts of the foreign tribes come. Without us around, I'm afraid no one in the human race can stop them, Ma Hongyu said in a low voice. Ma Hongyu had already analyzed the situation clearly. Everyone was a smart person, and they analyzed the pros and cons after some consideration. After a discussion, they decided to cross the barren land. Everyone immediately prepared for a day. The Empress also took advantage of this time to contact Rinpoche through the radio and told him about their decision. In the afternoon of the next day, the Empress asked some of the winged cavalry warriors and doctors to stay behind while the rest returned to Chuxia City. Even those who stayed behind had to retreat another 150 kilometers to the north. A distance of 150 kilometers in the mountains was better than flat ground, and they would be far away from the hunting areas of the 2 foreign tribes. At night, the Empress didn't need to borrow any strength. She took a step into the air and walked toward the top of the wall of 2 worlds as if she was walking on air. Everyone was surprised to see this. Li Fu didn't even have the ability to walk on air, but the Empress could. It was obvious that the Empress could beat Li Fu, who was the world's most powerful expert. The rankings in the world should change. However, at this point, no one cared about the rankings anymore. When the Empress reached the top of the wall of 2 worlds, she threw a thin nylon rope down from the air. Everyone borrowed the force to get to the top of the wall, put away the rope, and disappeared into the night. After walking and stopping for 2.5 days, the Empress finally saw that the scenery in front of her was no longer scorched black, and she could see a line of green on the horizon. Everyone's spirits were lifted. Finally, we are going out. I have had enough of this barren land. The most important thing was that the land of this barren land always carried traces of fire energy. When people walked on it, they would slowly absorb the fire poison into their bodies. It was as if something was stuck in their bodies, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. They needed to eliminate it first, but after a while, the fire poison would be absorbed back into their bodies again. This barren land is nearly 1,000 kilometers wide. It is said that the human emperor resisted the foreign tribes in the past. He first fought a great battle, and finally, he brazenly self-destructed. If this legend is true, I really don't know how powerful the human emperor is. Just how powerful would those foreign race experts be? Gao Yi sighed. As soon as he said this, everyone's expression changed. If someone could really achieve such great power, they could easily destroy the human race. What could the human race use to resist them? No, there must be a reason for this. You don't know the specifics, so don't think too much about it. The Empress shook her head slightly. The remnant of the human emperor could exert 70% of its original strength, and the chi and blood in its body were as vast as the sun and surging like a volcano. It was indeed amazing. However, it definitely couldn't reach the level of 1,000 kilometers of barren land. What does Emperor Qi know? Tao Qian asked curiously. You will know in the future. The Empress didn't tell them about the remnant of the human emperor's body. At present, only she, Li Yuanzhu, and Lin Dong knew about it. Along the way, everyone had to stop to rest and eliminate the fire poison because their bodies were invaded by the fire poison. Now that they could see the horizon in the distance, they perked up and finally walked out of the barren land after 2 hours. What greeted them was the vitality that was 30% more abundant than the areas they had passed through before. I didn't expect the vitality here to be so abundant. They had traveled from the 60,000 mountains to the barren land and then crossed the barren land to arrive here. The vitality in the surroundings had been increasing, making them feel like they had suddenly become rich and extremely excited. The Empress thought for a while and said, "This may not be the place with the most abundant vitality. This is still the periphery. The vitality in the depths must be more abundant." It's very likely. Everyone agreed. The vitality here is enough for us. Let's check if there are any tribes around and then find a secret place to cultivate in seclusion, the Empress said. They were all elites of the human race who had been cultivating in places with little vitality. It was unknown how much effort they had put in to get to where they were today. Their martial arts, temperament, and self-awareness were all incomparable to those of the foreign races who had been cultivating in places with such abundant vitality. Now that they were here, they felt that the calmness in their bodies had begun to loosen. They would probably be able to make progress in a short period of time. They rested for a while and ate some food to recover their energy and blood essence. Afterward, a few experts who were good at concealment and speed went in different directions. This is a good place. If I stay here for a while, I might be able to catch up with that person, Zhu Puhua thought to herself. It wasn't that she had any thoughts about the Empress, but that she simply admired her and pursued power. Although the martial arts hall's villains obeyed the Empress's orders, they were both respectful and envious of her cultivation level. It would be best if they could catch up with her. Moreover, the people of the martial arts hall were also comparing themselves with each other. The Empress sat cross-legged on the ground and took a deep breath. If she was in the capital, this breath would be like a tornado or a kuan swallowing the sea. The wind and clouds within a radius of a kilometer would move. But here, it was only within a radius of a few dozen meters. What everyone wanted was the vitality in the air. Vitality was originally scarce, and breathing it in would naturally have a great impact. That was why Erhua's breakthrough was so dramatic. As a result, when Erhua was born, it caused a stir in Wuji City. It was because the vitality on Earth was inferior to that of Deo, and Deo was far inferior to this place. If the triangle star field hadn't been discovered, the highest level of martial artists on Earth could only be at the advanced level of the Earth wheel. Eventually, because of the lack of vitality, the Earth veins wouldn't flourish, and they wouldn't be able to reach the Earth embryo realm. Now that the triangle star field had been discovered, the martial artists on Earth had a place to cultivate. Chapter 1155. A day later, those who had gone to investigate returned. There's a tribe 50 kilometers southeast of here with about 10,000 people. Among them, the mutants are only half a man tall. Their skin is gray, they have pointed ears, and there are many wrinkles on their skin. They are weak, and I think that their strength is about the same as our human race. The strongest among them is only at the cardinal heaven realm. This tribe doesn't rear any beasts and has planted a large area of vegetation. If we want to destroy them, we only need 3 to 5 people. It's the same for the tribe 150 kilometers southwest of here. They should be the same kind of mutants. The tribe is slightly bigger, but it's only about 10,000 people. There's also a tribe 100 kilometers south of here with about 8,000 people. We have seen this tribe before. It's the Giant Arm tribe. This tribe isn't weak, with at least 50 people at the Cardinal Heaven realm and 4 from the Longevity Heaven realm. The one who went to investigate the south was Donghua Sun, who was best at concealment and could move in the shadows. Therefore, even though this tribe was very strong, he was able to get a rough idea. There are a total of 36 powerful tribes, 369 middle-grade tribes, and the rest are low-grade tribes. The Mastiffs used to be one of the middle-grade tribes. Those 2 weak tribes should be low-grade tribes. The Giant Arm tribe should be a middle-grade tribe. If I'm not wrong, they should be the low-grade tribes in the surrounding areas ruled by the middle-grade tribes. In a larger area, they should be the low-grade tribes in the areas ruled by the powerful tribes, the Empress said after pondering for a while. Emperor Chi's guess is right. When I was hiding in the dark and overheard the conversation of the Giant Arm tribe, I found out that this place is under the jurisdiction of the Stainless Heaven Lord, who is the strongest expert of the Wooding tribe, one of the 36 powerful tribes. Everyone's expression changed. What else did you hear? The Empress asked. There's a big city 5,300 kilometers south of here called Stainless City. It's the residence of the indestructible Heaven Lord. The tribes in the southeast and southwest should be called Greythorn. Every year, they have to offer tributes to the Giant Arm tribe, and the Giant Arm tribe has to offer tributes to Stainless City every 3 years. This year is the year of the tribute, and I overheard it when someone from the Giant Arm tribe talked about it, Donghua Sun said. You've done a great service, the Empress praised. It was just a coincidence of fortune, said Donghua Sun with a smile. Donghua Sun had obtained quite a bit of information during this trip, and it was especially related to the existence of Stainless City. At the very least, all of them were slightly prepared. Is there a suitable place for us to stay nearby? Li Fu asked. 350 kilometers to the west, there's a mountain range. Perhaps we can temporarily hide there. After circling around the mountain, we discovered that the alien vegetation only extends to the foot of the mountain. There are also ferocious beasts in the mountain, and they aren't weak. Those gray thorns won't easily enter the mountain. That would be for the best. Everyone nodded. Then clean up this place. Don't let anyone know that we've been here. The Empress instructed. The ferocious men of the martial arts hall had been hunting in the mountains all year round. They were most adept at ambushing and cleaning up traces. Leaving 2 men to clean up, the rest of the men headed straight for the mountain range that was more than 150 kilometers away. In just 4 hours, they arrived at the mountain range. This mountain range wasn't big and couldn't be compared to the 60,000 mountains at all. However, it was enough for everyone to hide. As soon as they entered the mountain range, they encountered a swarm of fist-sized wasps. Their stingers were like steel nails, had a metallic luster, and had a fishy smell. Everyone immediately knew that these wasps must be extremely poisonous. Furthermore, these wasps were extremely fast, strong, and tough. They were almost as strong as a manual expert. Coupled with the fact that they were in groups, there were at least a few hundred to 1,000 wasps. When they flew over, they formed a dense black mass, and the sound of their flapping wings was like thunder. If one wasn't strong enough or had fewer people, they would have no choice but to retreat when encountering this swarm of wasps. Ma Hongyu raised her brush and drew a river that flowed down from the sky and rushed the wasps to one place. She then drew an earth energy to trap them within. However, these wasps were also ferocious. They all crashed into the yellow earth energy around them, causing the earth energy to tremble. If they were delayed for a moment longer, they might have escaped. Do it! Ma Hongyu shouted in a low voice. Fire Snake Tao Qian's first move was 2 fire snakes that wriggled in the air and twisted around the wasps. The wasps that were trapped in one place were all turned into ashes. These insects are really powerful. I almost couldn't trap them. Ma Hongyu said as she put away her brush. There's probably something good around here. Gluttonous Duke stroked his beard and smiled. You guys go first. I'll catch up later. After finishing his sentence, he went in the direction of the wasps. In just a moment, Gluttonous Duke caught up with everyone. He was carrying a beehive that was even bigger than him, and an alluring sweet smell came from it. Everyone chuckled when they saw his appearance. He was indeed worthy of his title as Gluttonous Duke. Everyone found a peak in the mountain range. From here, they could barely see the direction they came from with binoculars. If someone passed by, they would be able to detect it as long as they didn't hide their aura and didn't move too fast. Furthermore, the vitality here was 10% thicker than at the foot of the mountain. It could be considered a treasure land. There's a ferocious beast in that direction. Based on its aura, I'm afraid it's close to the strength of longevity heaven, someone said as he looked to the west. It's only 1 mountain away from here. Why don't we kill it first to avoid trouble? Gao Yi, why don't you and I take a look? Li Fu stood up and said. In the past 3 years, among the people who had arrived first, 2 of them had broken through to the next level and entered the heaven and earth territory. One of them was Gao Yi with the spear. The other was Xane from the Life Transformation Celestial Sect. She was a man of few words. Her divine weapon was a treasure bottle that could release life transformation celestial chi to attack and trap enemies. However, in terms of attack, she was not as good as Gao Yi with the spear. After the 2 of them left, 2 people went to look for food and water. The others opened up caves on the mountain peak to hide and cultivate. They moved trees and vines to block the cave entrance. It was difficult to detect them from afar. They didn't even need to activate the 2 sets of air projection equipment used to hide their tracks. Li Fu and Gao Yi followed the aura and searched behind another mountain. From afar, they saw a white snake that was more than 20 meters long coiled on a huge rock. The most shocking thing was that there were 2 claws in front of the snake's abdomen. They were no more than a meter long. Noticing the 2 of them approaching, the giant snake coiled up and stared at them with a cold and fierce gaze. It made hissing sounds. I can deal with this thing alone, Gao Yi said with a relaxed expression. This giant snake was full of vigor. It would have been troublesome to deal with it in the past, but now that he had taken that step, he could not be compared to the past. One had to know that besides the martial arts and moves of a spirit will expert, their most powerful weapon was their heaven-grade weapon. After taking that step, they already had their own heaven and earth domain. The heaven and earth domain was a powerful weapon to deal with enemies. Even though he had just taken this step, it was incomparable to what he had done before. The heaven and earth domain of Xia Yonghe that the Empress had seen before was similar to his heaven-grade weapon. It was a domain with countless spears that could be used to block, trap, and kill the enemy. Gao Yi, on the other hand, was different. Gao Yi's heaven and earth domain could find the flaws in the opponent's aura within a certain range. If he were to fight with someone, he could easily find the opponent's flaws and predict the enemy's moves. Li Fu was different from Gao Yi. Li Fu's heaven and earth domain strengthened his ability to see the weaknesses of objects. This allowed him to see the weaknesses of the opponent's weapon or his own body. No matter how strong the opponent's body was, he could break it with one blow. In other words, Gao Yi could find the opponent's flaws, but if the opponent's body was strong enough, he might not be able to break it. On the other hand, Li Fu was the opposite. No matter how strong the opponent's body was, he could break it as long as he found its weakness. However, if he couldn't find the opponent's flaws, he might not have the chance to attack. Seeing that Gao Yi had taken the initiative to fight, Li Fu saved himself some effort. He immediately laughed and said, "My arms and legs are old, and I want to rest." After he finished speaking, he found a place to sit. Coincidentally, there was a cluster of berries next to where he was sitting with bright red fruits hanging on them. Li Fu plucked a few of them, used his own method to determine if they were poisonous, and threw them into his mouth with a satisfied look on his face. Gao Yi was speechless when he saw Ren Baqian eating melon seeds and watching the crowd. Fortunately, he wanted to familiarize himself with the heaven and earth domain and hone his combat skills. He calmed himself down and ignored Li Fu. Two spears, one long and one short, appeared in his hands, and he walked into the attack range of the giant snake. He activated the qi activity in his body and combined it with his divine sense to sweep outwards. Immediately, he felt his 5 senses become clearer, and he could sense every movement within a 10-meter radius like the back of his hand. At this moment, Gao Yi felt a warning in his heart. His body swayed to the side, and he just happened to dodge the white snake's attack. He raised the short spear in his hand and felt as if he had hit an extremely solid object. A string of sparks appeared on the scales of the white snake. The giant snake's attack missed, so it took the opportunity to coil around him. However, Gao Yi was already prepared. He turned his body 7 or 8 times and took advantage of the situation to move near the giant rock. His long spear touched one of the scales, and a bloody hole appeared on the giant snake's body. However, compared to the giant snake's body, this bloody hole was like a needle. At most, it felt a little pain, but the ferocity in its eyes deepened. It retracted most of its attention from Li Fu and attacked even more fiercely. The two sides fought for a while. Gao Yi attacked with his long spear and defended with his short spear. He either dodged or blocked, but the giant snake couldn't do anything to him. Instead, it suffered many wounds and bloodstains, and the surrounding trees and rocks were all swept away. The giant snake felt that something was wrong. The enemy in front of it was difficult to deal with, and it couldn't be compared to its previous opponents. Not far away, there was another person who gave it an extremely dangerous feeling, and it wanted to retreat. However, just as it had this plan, Gao Yi sensed it and immediately stepped forward to entangle it. He attacked with the long spear in his hand, leaving it with nowhere to escape. However, after a while, Gao Yi found a flaw in the giant snake and stabbed it 7 inches deep. The giant snake was nailed 7 inches deep. It struggled and rolled around, sweeping the already messy surroundings again. However, Gao Yi's long spear was still nailed to Zhou Shi. After a while, it lost its strength and fell to the ground. Gao Yi jumped and stomped on the ground, nailing the spear directly into the giant rock. His body turned backward, and the short spear nailed into the giant snake's brain through its eye. The giant snake's body slightly twisted a few times, and finally, it stopped breathing. the two of them dragged the giant snake back. The snake was dozens of meters long, and its meat was also more than 1,000 kilograms. However, it was only enough for them to have a sumptuous meal. Next, they had to cultivate while looking for food. Fortunately, there was no lack of water and ferocious beasts in this mountain range. There were a few beasts with similar strength to this giant snake, but they were in deeper places. They didn't bother with them for now, and they could hunt them for a sumptuous meal in the future. Although one of the herdsmen went to inform them, everyone knew that the other party wouldn't arrive so soon. They took this opportunity to cultivate in secret, hoping to break through or advance further. Chapter 1156. In the following days, the Empress and the rest, as well as Renbachian, were all immersed in cultivation. The place where the Empress and the rest were at was filled with vitality. Those who were stuck at the bottleneck felt the bottleneck loosen, and those who hadn't condensed a heaven-grade weapon communicated with each other from time to time or asked those who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon for guidance. In the past, in Great Xia, everyone lived separately. Other than a few good friends exchanging insights, how could there be such an opportunity to communicate with so many experts? Needless to say, those who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon and those who hadn't condensed one were like heaven and earth, and there were few opportunities to ask for guidance. Moreover, even if they did ask for guidance, they wouldn't say much. Many of their experiences were secrets that were passed down from generation to generation. However, it was different now. The foreign races were the enemies of the human race, and everyone was alone outside the human residence. If someone asked for guidance, they would be satisfied. Therefore, everyone learned something in a short period of time and started to condense a heaven-grade weapon. There were even a few people who didn't have the method to condense a heaven-grade weapon in their sects, but they swore not to pass it on to others. Otherwise, they didn't know how long it would take for them to take this step. A few months passed in a flash, and everyone on the mountain quieted down. Other than occasionally looking for food or water, they rarely went out. Renbachian had honed 3 invisible arrows these days. This was originally a method used before reaching the Earth Embryo realm. Now that Renbachian had reached the Earth Embryo realm, it was even faster to return to practice. Moreover, he had died countless times while practicing revisualization, so his divine sense was much more tenacious than ordinary people. As a result, his cultivation speed was extremely fast. In just a few months, he was able to condense these 3 invisible arrows. With a thought from him, one of the invisible arrows flew out of his body. Without any abnormalities, it circled in the air before returning to his sea of knowledge. These 3 invisible arrows only attacked one's divine sense and didn't affect objects in the real world. They couldn't be seen or touched, and even if they hit somewhere, they would pass through without leaving a trace. However, by condensing one object from each of the 5 elements, one could condense the void into reality and attack objects in the real world. This ancient scroll of methods is so closely linked. First, I practiced revisualization, died countless times, and condensed my divine sense. Next, I recuperated and condensed the invisible arrows. Previously, when he was resting, he needed to visualize the 5 elements and see how they evolved and changed. Then, he would condense the 5 elements and create something out of nothing. He didn't know what kind of person could create such a cultivation method. There were no related rumors in the various myths on Earth, so it shouldn't be related to Earth. If he continued to cultivate step by step, he would be different from the warriors and aboriginals of Great Xia. The martial artists of Great Xia used the weapons and techniques that they had originally cultivated as their foundation. The divine weapon and the heaven and earth domain were either extensions or supplementary. On the other hand, the aboriginals only cultivated their flesh and blood to fight with their physical bodies. They condensed their divine soul and physical body into one, and did not cultivate their divine soul at all. On the other hand, this cultivation technique completely eliminated the aspect of physical combat, and it used the soul as the foundation to develop all changes. If one were to compare the sword sect to the master of Qi, the aboriginals would be the sword sect, while the warriors of Great Xia would be both the sword sect and the master of Qi. Renbochin pondered for a moment and gained some insights. He wanted to test out the power of the invisible arrow, so he called Xianzhu over. Although the aboriginals didn't cultivate their divine soul and physical body were condensed into one, and they couldn't be easily shaken. Furthermore, Xianzhu was a cardinal heaven expert, which was one realm higher than him. He probably couldn't do anything to her. Your Highness. Xianzhu, who was dressed in armor, strode into the hall and cupped her hands. Why are you looking for me, Your Highness? I've practiced an offensive technique and want to test out its power, Renbochin said bluntly. Xianzhu was stunned to hear this. Zhao Prince Consort had been diligently cultivating ever since he attained the Earth Embryo realm, but she didn't see him practicing any martial arts. Every day, he would just lay down or concentrate. She had seen him a few times, but he didn't even notice it, as if he was in a daze. All right. Xianzhu immediately agreed. She secretly wondered if she should pretend if Zhao Prince Consort's attack wasn't powerful. This thought flashed through her mind, but she couldn't help but laugh in her heart. She felt that this idea was somewhat inexplicable. While Xianzhu was still thinking, Renbochin didn't make any moves. However, she suddenly felt as if her brain had been pierced by something sharp. It was as if a hole had been poked in her brain. Her mind was drifting, and she couldn't recover for a while. After a long while, her mind returned to her body. She felt a sharp pain in her brain, and she couldn't help but reveal a pained expression. Fortunately, this pain only lasted for a few breaths before gradually subsiding. However, it didn't subside, and she still felt a headache. Xianzhu was shocked. The two of them were about 30 meters apart, and she had been hit before she felt anything. Although it didn't last long, if someone were to attack her now, it would be difficult for her to defend herself even if they were weaker than her. Seeing that Xianzhu's reaction wasn't small, Renbochin was somewhat happy. It seemed like it was effective. He then asked Xianzhu how she felt, and she told him the truth. Renbochin pondered. If it had such an effect on a cardinal heaven expert, he didn't know what it would be like on a spirit will expert. However, spirit will experts had already cultivated their divine sense, so the effect wouldn't be as good as on the aboriginals. However, Renbochin was able to cause such an attack even though he was one level lower than her, causing Xianzhu to be in pain for 7 to 8 breaths. If she was facing someone whose strength wasn't that much different, the effect would probably be better. Furthermore, if he had a crossbow or a close-quarters combat technique, it wouldn't be difficult to kill her opponent. More importantly, the arrow could be moved at will from 30 meters away, and it would be difficult for others to detect or evade it. It seemed like this invisible arrow wasn't only used to protect one's body before reaching the spirit will level. Even after reaching the spirit will level, as long as the power of this invisible arrow increased, it could also pose a great threat to people of the same level. While Renbochin was pondering, Xianzhu was also recalling what she felt just now. She felt that something was strange. Besides the pain, there seemed to be something else. After waiting for a while, she saw that Renbochin was about to speak, so she said, "Your Highness, can you attack again? I want to try again. This is an attack on the spirit." "I don't know if there are any side effects," Renbochin said. The divine sense was the foundation of the human body. If it was damaged, it would be troublesome. The spirit and body of the aboriginals are condensed at will. Although there was some pain before, it was faintly discernible and didn't cause any damage. "Your Highness, you should be fine after a night's rest if you attack again." Xianzhu was quite confident about this. Renbochin nodded in agreement after hearing her say this. In that case, get ready. Your Highness, please do it. Renbochen's mind moved, and the second invisible arrow left his body and hit her in an instant. He saw that Xianzhe's eyes were blank, and her face was a little flushed. Her body swayed, and her legs twisted slightly. A moment later, her face turned into a painful expression. Seeing this scene, Renbochen began to feel a little strange. Xianzhe came back to her senses after a while and finally knew where the feeling that something was wrong came from. It was the feeling of her spirit leaving her body after being hit by the arrow. It was very similar to the feeling of being electrocuted. After thinking about it for a while, she then realized that she was still in the hole. When she looked up, she saw Renbochen's slightly strange gaze, and she immediately felt very uncomfortable. She immediately cupped her hands and said, "If there's nothing else, Your Highness, I'll take my leave. If you want to find someone else to try it on, get someone to call me." "Okay." Renbochen nodded. Seeing Xianzhe leave the hall, he felt even more strange. This invisible arrow has such an effect. Or is it that Xianzhe's constitution is different from ordinary people? It seems like I have to find someone else to try it on. Renbochen was very interested in the techniques in the ancient scroll of methods, and his enthusiasm for cultivation was much higher than before. He wasn't like the Empress who forced him to practice fighting techniques in the past. It seemed like this path was very suitable for him. At present, there was still an invisible arrow in his sea of knowledge. This kind of invisible arrow would decrease every time it was used, and it would take a day to grind out another one. If all three were used, it would take 3 days to grind out all of them. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1157. Over the next few days, Renbochen didn't find a suitable candidate to experiment on after grinding 2 more invisible arrows. Instead, his attention was attracted by another matter. "Your Highness, there has been progress in the study of vitality." Upon hearing this news, Renbochen immediately wanted to go to Eternal Mountain. However, after some thought, he gave up on this idea. He asked the person in charge of the Eternal Mountain Laboratory to come to the capital. 2 days later, Renbochen met with 3 people. The person in charge was a white man named Lloyd Adam. He was a German and an expert in chemistry. The other 2 were white and Latino, and they were both experts in chemistry. These 3 people were also somewhat famous on Earth. They were kidnapped by Renbochen to be in charge of the study of vitality. "Tell me the details," Renbochen asked as he sat on the sofa. "Yes, let me introduce you first. In the previous experiment, we discovered vitality atoms with the element symbol YQ. Vitality atoms are everywhere, whether it's in the air, plants, soil, rocks, humans, or beasts. An individual vitality atom is very active and can combine with a variety of elements, the most important of which is the oxygen atom. After the vitality atom combines with the oxygen atom, it can become vitality particles that can be absorbed by us. Its composition is YQ2O, also known as binary oxygen. Although vitality atoms are active, they are very stable after combining with other elements and are difficult to separate. That was until the black crystal sent by Your Highness. That crystal is composed of ternary silicon sulfide with a structure of YQ3CS. This structure is also very stable and difficult to separate even at high temperatures. The vitality atoms play a major role in this. Even if it is separated, the vitality atoms will quickly combine with other elements and react. This reaction can only be stopped under vacuum conditions. However, it can be converted into ternary aluminum sulfide using aluminum. We also discovered a substance with a composition of KUC, cyanide carbide, which reacts with ternary aluminum sulfide to produce relatively unstable ternary carbon. What do you mean by relatively unstable? What's the use of this ternary carbon? Renbochin leaned forward slightly and asked. Judging from the other party's words, the focus was on this ternary carbon. Ternary carbon is a kind of crystal, but when it comes into contact with air, its structure will slowly change into binary oxygen and carbon dioxide. If I had to describe this process, it would be like evaporation, Lloyd Adams said proudly. Renbochin did some calculations in his mind. According to the results of the research, two-dimensional oxygen was the so-called vital energy, and it was the main source of vital energy absorbed by the human body. When it entered the human body, the oxygen and vitality were absorbed by the human body. Ternary carbon could be converted to ternary oxygen. Wouldn't this artificially form an area with higher vitality than other places? Upon realizing this, Renbochin's heart beat a little faster. The structure of binary oxygen is very stable, right? Yes. What's the rate of evaporation? A crystal like this will take about 6 hours to completely evaporate. Lloyd Adams took out a small bottle. It contained a kind of liquid and a white crystal the size of a knuckle on his little finger. Is this the preservation of ternary carbon? How long can it be preserved? What kind of liquid is inside? Inside is unsaturated high-grade fatty acid vegetable oil. Ternary carbon can be stored in it for more than 3 years. That's enough. Renbochin stood up happily. Something as important as vital energy was actually separated and produced by chemical means in the laboratory. This simply made it difficult for him to calm down. If they could produce their own vital energy in the future and distribute it to everyone, such as Hongwu and the other generals who were stationed in various places, the important ministers in the court, and warriors with potential, the strength of the human race would be greatly improved after a period of consolidation. Only a small number of people could pass through the wall between the two worlds. Otherwise, they would definitely be besieged by the foreign races. Furthermore, the logistics wouldn't be able to support it. That mountain range could only support the Empress and the others. However, if they could produce vital energy, many people wouldn't need to pass through that area and could improve at the fastest speed. If there was enough ternary carbon, it could even make the vital energy in a space far surpass that of the foreign races outside the wall between the two worlds. The value of this was simply too great. What do you need to produce ternary carbon? Can we only use ternary silicon sulfide? Renbochin got up and walked around a few times before asking. Ternary silicon sulfide was the black, translucent crystal that Li Fu and the others had knocked out from the wall between the two worlds. At present, there were still foreign tribes that were too close to the territory of the foreign races. It would be best if they could use something else to replace it. Ternary silicon sulfide is currently the most suitable material to produce ternary carbon in large quantities. As for other materials, ternary carbon may also be produced, but from the looks of the materials we have studied so far, it is difficult to produce them in large quantities, Lloyd Adams said. Renbochin calculated in his mind. It seemed that he had to get the wall between the two worlds no matter what. Now that the Empress and the others were cultivating there, it was better not to disturb them. It was said that the wall between the two worlds was vast and boundless, at least 5,000 kilometers wide. There were only 2 foreign tribes, including the one by the sea, and there were only 3 foreign tribes. There was still a large area outside of their control. They should immediately arrange for people to go to the wall between the two worlds, set up a factory, and peel off the ternary silicon sulfide from above. However, the wall between the two worlds was extremely hard, and even Li Fu could only break a fist-sized piece at a time. If they wanted to peel off the ternary silicon sulfide, they still had to rely on these experts. Renbochin sat back on the sofa and praised, "Well done. What reward do you want?" Renbochin was in a very good mood. Given the contributions of these scientists, any reward wouldn't be too much. Money, reputation, and women. We also want to move here. Mount Empress is too desolate. Although there are brothels, we see those people every day, Lloyd Adams said bluntly. I agree. Ren Bachyan laughed. It wasn't just these people. The sword masters also had the same idea. After staying in the desolate mountains for most of their lives, they had found a stable place to live. Of course, they had to find a prosperous and affluent place. Ren Bachyan had previously promised those sword masters that he would take this opportunity to move some of them over and build another laboratory in the capital. It was better to keep some of the important research under his watch. After that, Ren Bachyan asked Lloyd Adam for a few more pieces of ternary carbon. Ren Bachyan simply asked for all of them and found a few places to experiment. The ternary carbon that Lloyd Adam took out at the beginning wasn't the largest, and of course, it wasn't the smallest either. The smallest was a crystal that was a little bigger than a grain of rice, which was the result of the initial experiment. The best was a white crystal that was the size of 2 fingers. Ren Bachyan experimented, took out a piece of ternary carbon that was the size of a knuckle, and placed it on the cloth. As soon as he took it out, he could feel a trace of vitality slowly emitted from it. As he breathed, it was slowly absorbed into his body like a clear stream washing through his body. A small part of it slowly integrated into the blood in his body, while most of it completely dissipated. Ren Bachyan had only felt this kind of vitality when he broke through to the Earth embryo realm. After that, he could only feel the movement of the Earth's veins. It was probably because there was too little vitality in the air or because he wasn't strong enough. Presumably, this would change after he became a spirit will expert. Today, with this piece of ternary carbon, Ren Bachyan could feel the existence of vitality again and was immediately overjoyed. Although he couldn't see anything in the short term, Ren Bachyan dared to conclude that this item was invaluable. However, a small piece of ternary carbon could only release vitality bit by bit. If it was in a small enclosed space, it could slightly increase the vitality content in the air. However, it didn't have this effect in the main hole. Ren Bachyan could only absorb a very small part of it, and the rest dissipated with the air. Of course, it didn't disappear, but it was like a drop of water falling into the sea and didn't have any effect. Then, Ren Bachyan took out the 2-fingered piece of ternary carbon and placed it in his palm. His entire body was immediately invigorated. Vitality that was 7 to 8 times thicker than before assaulted his senses. Ren Bachyan felt a burst of joy in his heart. After playing with the ternary carbon for a while, he saw that it had shrunk a little. Based on this speed, this piece of ternary carbon should be able to be used for 24 hours. Ren Bachyan put the crystal back into the bottle and sealed it. Previously, there weren't many black crystals that were sent back. After all, they were difficult to mine, and Li Fu didn't know what they were used for. He only picked up a few large pieces and sent them back. Nowadays, there weren't many left in the laboratory. If he wanted to obtain them in large quantities, even a year wouldn't be enough. The round-trip journey was too long, and the current flight route was only to Chuxia City. The straight-line distance from Chuxia City to the Wall of Two Worlds was at least 20,000 kilometers. However, this was in the middle of a mountain range. They had to cross mountains and ridges, and they had to avoid some dangerous places. It was more than 30,000 kilometers. Moreover, there were ferocious beasts everywhere, and some poisonous insects could cause great trouble. The winged cavalry warriors were only at the Kismet heaven level and had to be careful there. They could only travel about 50 kilometers a day, and a round trip would probably take close to 2 years. It seems like we have to expand the Protectorate of the South further south. Now that the flight route to Chuxia City has been opened, the logistical pressure has been greatly reduced, and we should be able to recruit another 30,000 soldiers. After recruiting this time, we don't have to expand the area of control to either side. We just have to go all the way to the south, as far as possible, and then clean up the ferocious beasts in the area and open up the flight route. Tomorrow, we will have to discuss this matter with all the ministers in the imperial court. That old fellow, Qin Chuan, will definitely not object. Although Tu Yu is dissatisfied, with the ternary carbon as a weapon, no one can say anything. Not only will he not object, but he will also strongly support it. Ren Baqin chuckled. Previously, the Qin nation had to use Dao's paper money. Those people in the imperial court are still arguing, so we have to put in more effort. Ren Baqin pondered again and felt that he should let Juiyu, the protectorate of the south, take action to let them know who was the master and who was the subordinate. Under the pressure of the large army, no matter what considerations they have to listen to him. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.